It's tragic that they aren't. That's the political stunt. You'd think with so many Americans dying as fentanyl pours into our country, as the drug cartels take operational control of our border, that Secretary Mayorkas would come up with something different than an app that further incentivizes people to pour into the country. But no. The failure at the southern border is not about money. It's not about numbers of Border Patrol agents, not about technology, although all of those things are needed, and we can do more and will do more. This massive crisis, this human tragedy, is the result of decisions and the incompetence of this secretary. And I believe our hearing today will begin to show the process of how this has happened and why. I want to take a second before I conclude and thank the men and women of Customs and Border Patrol, and thank our witnesses who are here today. They are doing yeoman's work. And I'm going to take Chairman's privilege, members, for just a second. As somebody who's been shot at in combat, I can tell you, who's lost friends in combat, I can tell you I understand a little. I don't understand a lot of it, because you're looking for sometimes a needle in the haystack. Your rules of engagement are significantly different than ours were. But I know what it's like to have the tracer rounds coming at you. And I deeply, deeply appreciate your service and the service of the men and women who work for you. It is impressive what they do every day, despite these unbelievable challenges that have been forced on them. Thank you all for being here. And thank you. That ends my statement. Now, we're pleased to have, and let me say this line that I'm required to say. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We're pleased to have two distinguished panels of witnesses before us today. This very important topic. I ask that our first panel of witnesses rise and raise their right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you will give before this Committee on Homeland Security of the United States House of Representatives will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Let the record reflect that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. I'd like to now formally introduce our first panel of witnesses. Raul Ortiz has served as the 25th Chief of the United States Border Patrol since August of 2021. He oversees domestic border security operations outside of the ports of entry, including over 5,000 miles at our northern border and nearly 2,000 miles at our southern border. He leads more than 20,000 Border Patrol agents and professional staff across the country in protecting our homeland, and we thank him for his leadership and his efforts to keep us safe. Steve Cagen serves as the Assistant Director for Homeland Security Investigations and leads the efforts to combat transnational organized crime. Mr. Cagen has worked on drug and arms trafficking and money laundering operations across our country and in Mexico over the long and accomplished 25-year career. We thank him for his service, and we look forward to your valuable insights today. I thank all of our witnesses for being here today. The witnesses' full statements will appear in the record, of course, as usual, and I now recognize Chief Ortiz for his opening 5-minute statement.
Thank you, Chairman and committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to represent the men and women of the United States Border Patrol and speak with you on the critical issue of border security. National security, enforcing our laws, and rescue missions are not just a job. It's our sworn duty to secure our country and protect our communities. I am honored to serve as the 25th Chief of the United States Border Patrol. As a third-generation veteran of the armed forces, I come from a family that was called to serve in uniform. My career spans more than 3 decades, from Border Patrol agent to leadership assignments all along the southwest border, along with 2 tours in Afghanistan and multiple stints in Washington, D.C. While the operational demands of the Border Patrol shifted over the course of my career, one thing remains absolute, which is the dedication, professionalism, courage, and conviction of the men and women of the Border Patrol. Every day that I get to put this uniform on fills me with tremendous pride, and it will remain my greatest honor. It is well documented in the data and covered in the media that the last several years were some of the Border Patrol history. In fiscal year 21, over 1.6 million migrants were encountered. In fiscal year 22, over 2.2 million. And so far this year, we have seen over 900,000 encounters. The migration flow represents challenges and in some areas a crisis situation. In the past 30 years, I physically served in almost all the locations that experienced migrant surges, to include San Diego, El Centro, and the Rio Grande Valley in the 90s. Arizona, early 2000s, and again in Rio Grande Valley and Del Rio during the last 10 years. Challenges and crises are nothing new to the Border Patrol, and I'm incredibly proud of our personnel, as well as our many partners. Now, unlike in previous surges, we are seeing traffic, including large groups, spread across multiple locations instead of just one or two specific sectors. This places a tremendous strain on Border Patrol resources and our operational posture. For a long time, investments to support border security operations have been structured around a three-legged stool: personnel, infrastructure, and technology. But changing conditions require a fourth leg, which is a processing enterprise. In just the last few years, did we really start to invest in that fourth leg? The processing enterprise is critical in addressing current operational challenges, and we are making significant investments to include Border Patrol processing coordinators, electronic A-file processing, our unified immigration portal, and contract services, allowing agents to return to the field and patrol the border. When traffic shifts rapidly, I cannot adjust operations swiftly. When I reallocate resources and manpower, it comes at a cost to other locations. Today's border environment requires a whole-of-government solution to include international engagements, resourcing, and consequences, which could be in the form of legislative or policy adjustments. And that is where I ask for your help. We need more options. Before I close, I would like to address three issues that I am frequently asked about. First, our Horse Patrol units. As a former Horse Patrol agent, I can attest to how vital Horse Patrol units are in responding to remote and harsh locations. Last year's mass migration event in Del Rio was chaotic. We had over 20,000 people show up in one place in a short period of time. Even so, we were able to provide food, water, and medical care without a single loss of life. I remain proud of the work of our Horse Patrol units and what we did in Del Rio. As the Chief of the Border Patrol, I am ultimately responsible for all operational decisions. To that point, and as a senior field commander during that response, I accepted and continue to accept full responsibility for the actions taken. Second, I am extremely proud of the 190 agents that responded to the horrific mass shooting at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas. Our agents ultimately made entry into the classroom, engaged the shooter, and provided critical medical care. We were there as a partner to our local and state counterparts and did everything we could to support them. I continue to champion those who demonstrated heroism to preserve life and render aid to that day. Finally, I'm often asked about the morale and well-being of our workforce. You have recognized the tremendous strain and pressure the border security situation has caused our personnel. And we have seen a rise in suicides. Tragically, 17 CBP employees lost their lives to suicide in 2022. I often worry about the well-being of our employees, and I appreciate Congress's support for our resiliency programs. While our mission and our agents continue to be the recipients of negative rhetoric, our resolve has never wavered. As a law enforcement organization, we strive to serve our communities, families, and fellow citizens with pride. Our national strategy is centered around organizational excellence, working with our partners, and building capacity to counter the criminal organizations and cartels operating in the border environment. Again, thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to your questions, sir.
Thank you, Chief. I will now recognize our next witness, Assistant Director Cagen, for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Chairman Green and distinguished members of the Committee of Homeland Security, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you and discuss Homeland Security investigations efforts to disrupt and dismantle transnational criminal organizations. My testimony today will focus on HSI's effort to disrupt transnational criminal organizations at the border and beyond. As the principal investigative component of the Department of Homeland Security, HSI is responsible for investigating and dismantling transnational criminal organizations, or TCOs, responsible for flooding the United States with drugs, fueling the overdose epidemic. To do this, HSI conducts federal criminal investigations at every critical location in the illicit supply chain. Internationally, where TCOs operate and manufacture illicit narcotics. At our nation's physical borders, where smugglers attempt to exploit America's legitimate trade, travel, and financial systems. And in our communities, where criminal organizations earn substantial profits from selling poison to our friends, neighbors, and family members. Criminal organizations in the 21st century do not limit themselves to a single crime. The organizations have evolved beyond just narcotic smuggling and are now involved in associated crimes of weapons trafficking, human smuggling, money laundering, and more, all of which HSI investigates. HSI investigative efforts must be broad in scope to fully identify and dismantle these enterprises. HSI combats TCOs by using unique and broad investigative authorities to enforce over 400 federal laws and target TCOs from multiple investigative angles. This includes stopping TCOs from getting U.S. origin weapons and seizing the money that motivates their crimes. Simply put, HSI attacks the entire illicit network. HSI is a premier law enforcement agency best positioned to attack cartels and TCOs at each phase of the supply chain to inflict maximum damage, resulting in cascading effects against illicit networks. HSI's counter-TCO efforts begin abroad. HSI has the largest international investigative presence within DHS, comprised of hundreds of special agents strategically placed in 93 offices in 56 countries. This includes offices located in Mexico, where the vast majority of fentanyl is produced, and throughout the Asia-Pacific region, where precursor chemicals originate. The effectiveness of our international counter-TCO effort is greatly enhanced by HSI's transnational criminal investigative units, or TCIUs, which are vetted law enforcement officers and prosecutors who lead some of HSI's most significant extraterritorial investigations and prosecutions targeting TCOs. Disrupting and dismantling the fentanyl and methamphetamine precursor chemical supply chain is an integral element to HSI's approach to stopping the flow of illicit narcotics. Cartels operate on an industrial scale when producing chemicals, and these precursors serve as oxygen the cartels need to manufacture their poison destined for America's streets. HSI is attacking the illicit narcotics supply chain through an intelligence-based counter-narcotics operation that blends traditional investigative and analytical techniques with interagency collaboration, industry partnerships, and computer-based tools to disrupt and dismantle the chemical supply chain. The interdiction of precursor shipments plays a key role in disrupting the TCO's ability to produce a finished product before it even gets to our borders. At our nation's physical borders, HSI works with our DHS partners to combat the illicit TCO movement of illicit goods. As CBP deploys its new technology at the southwest border ports of entry, it will likely increase the number of CBP origin seizures. As a result, HSI will need additional staffing to support complex investigations and prosecutions to dismantle TCO threats to the homeland. Domestically, HSI Border Enforcement Security Task Forces, or BEST, represent one of the agency's premier tools in turning border seizures into TCO toppling investigations. The primary mission of the BEST is to combat the existing emergent TCOs by employing a full range of federal, state, local, tribal, and international law enforcement resources. There are currently 86 BESTs comprised of approximately 1,000 law enforcement officers from over 200 agencies and National Guard units. HSI is dedicated to using its broad and unique authorities to stop illicit drugs at every critical location in the supply chain. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you and for your continued support of HSI and our enduring effort to attack illicit narcotics supply chains. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cagen. Members will be recognized by order of seniority for 5 minutes of questioning. An additional round of questioning may be able, if we have the time today, after members have all been recognized. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. Chief Ortiz, does DHS have operational control of our entire border?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you for that. I'd like to share it with the American people. This is the actual definition of operational control that is in the code, written into the code well before I came to Congress, the definition, and I appreciate the honesty of Chief Ortiz. Do you think that, let's play a video clip here. I just want to share this question.
Will you testify under oath right now? Do we have operational control, yes or no?
Yes, we do. And
we have operational control of the borders.
Yes, we do.
Chief Ortiz, do you think that Secretary Mayorkas is lying there?
Sir, when you talk about operational control, about 10 years ago, we used operational control as a measuring stick of our effectiveness along the southwest border. My new strategy is geared towards mission advantage.
So you know I'm asking a very specific question,
yes,
and you're kind of describing how the goalpost has been moved because of the mass waves of people that are coming. My question, you heard the Secretary, he said we have operational control. That's the definition of operational control.
Based upon the definition you have, sir, up there, no.
We don't have operational control.
No, sir.
But is Secretary Mayorkas lying?
I didn't see the rest of the testimony there, sir.
He was asked, you saw, he was asked if we had operational control, and he said yes. I think it's either ignorance, which is unacceptable, or it's lying. 4.7 million alien encounters, 1.3 million gotaways, a record number of individuals on the terrorist watch list, a record number of criminal alien encounters, a record number of aliens with gang affiliation encounters, a record number of drug seizures. Do these numbers project confidence to the American people that DHS has operational control?
I will tell you I have confidence in the men and women that are executing the mission out there to the best of their ability.
I appreciate
We've seen across the southwest border 9 sectors, and out of those 9 sectors, 4 of them have significant resources. When you think about the double-layer fencing, some of the surveillance technology, and then the amount of agents we deployed. But in 5 of those 9 southwest border sectors, we have seen an increase in flow, and that has caused a considerable strain on our resources and really has forced the Border Patrol to move agents and even migrants to some of the other areas.
Yeah, I pointed that out in my statement, too, that the cartels have figured out if they flood certain areas, you got to shift resources, and that's allowing them to have free reign. That, to me, is the cartels controlling the southern border. Does that? I mean, think about it. Think about it for a second, like you're a military guy, and that's the perimeter, right? Do the drug cartels have control of sections of the perimeter of the United States?
I will tell you that in certain areas, the cartels control an awful lot on the southern border, south of the United States. Our men and women are out there. I just spent the last 3 days here in South Texas patrolling with some of our agents, and they're doing a phenomenal job of responding to traffic that's coming across that border. And that plays out across the entire southwest border.
You and I both deeply respect the men who work for you. And I think they're doing yeoman's work. I've talked to sectors where they're pulling 90 hours a week. These guys are killing themselves. Literally 17 of them have committed suicide because they've been overwhelmed. Why is this huge surge here? What's the cause? What's the difference? You were here under the last administration during COVID, all the excuses that have been given. So what changed?
Several things have changed, I think, across the world, if you think about it this way. We've seen individuals from 159 countries already this fiscal year.
So why do they feel suddenly, after January of 2021, that they can come here?
I would think that we have what we call push and pull factors. Some of those push factors are certainly going to be economic conditions in their host countries.
Those were there before,
yes,
Chief.
Sir.
I mean, they were there before. Hurricanes happened in Central America before. What changed?
I think as you look at the U.S. and what we're experiencing now with the economic conditions that we have here, when you think about the health conditions that we have here, we're in much better position than most of the countries that we're dealing with just to ourselves.
I would assert to you that all that was there before January 21. The COVID was there before 2021. The economic challenges were there before 2021. I would submit to you that it's two things, and your sector chiefs have told me what they are. One, they're the policies. And those policies came from the promises the president made during his campaign. And two, the State Department has allowed the return agreements to expire. Not renegotiating those agreements has prevented ICE from being able to send people back. Is that not correct?
I will tell you, our inability to repatriate individuals to certain countries is a tremendous challenge for us, and I would agree with that.
On the administration. Thank you. I yield. I've taken a little extra time. My apologies to my colleagues. I'll now recognize Mr. Higgins for his comments and questions.
Director Cagen, it's good to talk to you, sir. God bless you. I hope you and your family are well. I'm going to talk to you about China and Chinese nationals crossing the border and HSI's involvement regarding those individuals. It's noted that there's an increase in Chinese nationals apprehended at the southwest border, and we know that many of the precursors that are used to create fentanyl are made in China. A lot of fentanyl entering our country originates in China. And now we're seeing an increase in Chinese nationals being captured, which means there's an increase in Chinese nationals that are not being captured. It's been presented to me, it's been posited that the Chinese that are effectively evading law enforcement at the border and entering into our country recognize that over the course of the next couple of years, Republicans are going to take very aggressive actions to gain control, operational control of our border, and shut down this wide open trafficking that they're currently enjoying. So it's been posited to me that Chinese nationals that are crossing into our country include scientists that are coming into America to connect with established criminal networks to bring their laboratory, to build laboratories here. Are Chinese nationals, is HSI looking into this, are Chinese nationals entering America illegally to connect with established criminal networks and bring their laboratory capabilities here into the continental United States because they know the day is coming where we'll have a Republican president and we'll regain control of the border?
Representative Higgins, thank you very much for the question. Good to see you as well. As it pertains to the human smuggling of Chinese nationals and the narcotic side of it, our investigations, as you know, we're an investigative agency, our investigations and intelligence show that those are two separate situations. We see when it comes to China, that's the beginning of the illicit supply chain of fentanyl. We know, we don't have the visibility that we need, of course, into China, but as an investigative agency, we have the visibility of precursor chemicals as they leave Chinese ports to venture across the water into Mexico. Eventually, those precursors will end up in Mexican labs where the actual pills are produced. That's what HSI does. That's where we are strong, and that's where we're critical to this entire supply chain, which is attacking the supply chain at those critical nodes. We can stop the container ships full. I mean, we're talking container ships. We've seized, I believe it's a little bit over 3.3 million pounds of precursor chemicals coming from China entering into Mexico. When those precursors enter into Mexico, what we do is try to stop them from getting into the labs in Mexico where it's synthesized, right? That's where the drugs are produced. That's where the cartels are producing it. We utilize our transnational criminal investigative units, which we have a very robust and strong criminal investigative unit in Mexico. Mexican prosecutors, Mexican officials working with us. As I've said multiple times in open hearings, they're working on behalf of the American people. So what we utilize is their efforts, intelligence community and our efforts in order to stop these drugs from coming into the United States and push our borders out to try to alleviate the pressure on our DHS partners and friends so they're not feeling so much of the fentanyl coming in. But to answer your question, we do not see the link investigatively or intelligence right now of the human smuggling aspect as it pertains to the fentanyl coming in from China.
Well, we'll talk further about that in person. Mr. Chairman, I don't see a clock here. How much
You got
time?
one right here.
All right, Chief, it's good to see you again, sir. God bless you. Hope you and your family are well. These are difficult times that we face to enforce the laws of our land as we've sworn an oath to do so. And you're at the point of that spear, and to a great deal, you're held responsible. And I think you're a responsible man. I would like to, in my remaining no time, just answer this question regarding commands that are coming down from Secretary Mayorkas. It's come to our attention that many commands that ultimately arrive at the field level don't have much of a paper trail. They've been communicated verbally. You could speak to that, and how does that relate to our aerostat techs? Why are the aerostats down? That's a DOD cooperative operation. They worked. Why are they down? I was told in January they were being pulled down for the first quarter.
I'll give you a real quick 30 seconds, Chief, to answer that. Sorry.
Thank you, Chairman, and good to see you again, Mr. Higgins. I will tell you that with respect to the chain of command, both ICE, myself, and our DHS partners meet quite regularly with the department, more specifically with the Secretary. We have constant conversations and dialogue about ongoing operations, and certainly he's made multiple trips down to the southwest border. So I do appreciate the level of support I get from both our Commissioner, Troy Miller, and Secretary Mayorkas with respect to some of my requests on capacity building and making adjustments to our operations in the field. With respect to the aerostats, that's a very expensive program, $4.6 million for each one of those aerostats. We have 4 of them deployed here in South Texas. They're doing a phenomenal job. We are looking at alternatives to be able to use similar-like technology that may be less expensive, and then we're going to try and do everything we can to incorporate that into our normal operations.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll now recognize Vice Chair Guest from Mississippi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To both of our gentlemen, thank you for being here. Thank you for the men and women that serve under your command. I want you to know that the frustration and the anger that you may feel today is not directed at you personally, and it's clearly not directed under the men and women that serve under you, but is directed at this administration, which has not only failed the American public, but has failed the officers that serve with you. Chief, I want to expand a little bit on something that Chairman Green touched on. He talked about operational control of the border, and I think you were very candid when you said that We do not have operational control of the border. I want to follow that up with a question. Is the border secure? We have heard repeatedly from Secretary Mayorkas when he has testified before this hearing. He has told myself, he has told Congressman Bishop that. We heard him tell Congressman Roy in a Judiciary Committee the same thing. We've heard the Vice President say that. The Vice President said in an interview with Meet the Press when asked by Chuck Todd, she said the border is secure, but we have a broken immigration system. Then she went on to say, we have a secure border, and that is a priority for any nation, including ours and our administration, but there are still a lot of problems. And so my question to you, Chief, is the border secure?
Thank you, Congressman. I will tell you that I'm responsible for the northern border, I'm responsible for our coastal sectors, and I'm responsible for the southwest border. And I'm going to break it down real quick. Northern border, I have 8 sectors up on the northern border, and I've got 1 sector that is experiencing an awful lot of influx of migrants from Canada. I went to Ottawa, Canada about 4 weeks ago, met with my RCMP partners, and we're addressing that threat. I've got 25 additional agents deployed up there. And at one point, I had 854 officers deployed from the northern border to the southern border to help with the situation that we were encountering. I no longer have to do that. Out in our coastal sectors, I've got tremendous.
And don't want to cut you off, Chief, but my time is the southern border secure. I'm not worried about the northern border. Let's talk strictly about the southern border. Is it your testimony that it is secure or is not secure?
When you look at the southwest border, I have 9 southwest border sectors from San Diego to here to South Texas, Rio Grande Valley. Out of the 9 southwest border sectors, I feel like the men and women are doing a phenomenal job in 4 of them with respect to the amount of flow and the processing that we are encountering on a daily basis. 5 of those southwest border sectors are experiencing a higher level of flow than we have seen previously, and that creates some unique challenges for us, and it puts a strain on the overall immigration system, not just for myself, but for our partner agencies, for our sheriff's departments, police departments. And so I have to move resources into those 5 southwest border sectors, and that forces me to make some adjustments across the entire 2,000 miles of the southwest border.
All right, so I'm taking it then as your testimony that 5 of the 9 sectors on the southwest border are not currently secure. Let me ask you if you would agree with this statement. This is a statement that Colonel McGraw with the Texas Department of Public Safety, he will be testifying in the second panel. I'm sure you know him well and you work very closely with him. He, in his written statement, said that it is the assessment of the Texas Department of Public Safety that the most significant public safety and homeland security threat to Texas and our nation is an unsecured border with Mexico. He goes on to say, and again, this is not directed at your men individually, but more at the administration, the federal government has failed to do its constitutional duty and secure the border. This failure comes at the detriment of our citizens and the benefit of the Mexican cartels. And of course, we have seen Mexican cartels become extremely active in human trafficking and drug smuggling. We saw the Gulf cartel kill 2 Americans, shot another just recently south of Brownsville. Of course, we saw very disturbing images this week of the mass surge there at the El Paso port of entry, where I believe there were roughly 1,000 immigrants who tried to surge into the United States. And so my question is, do you agree with the statement of Colonel McGraw when he talks about that this is a public safety threat and a threat to Homeland Security?
Yes, sir. I do agree with Colonel McGraw. I have an excellent relationship with the state of Texas. We continue to work those partnerships, both with our sheriffs, our police departments here in Texas and across the southwest border. I will tell you this, though, when you think about a secure border, right now we're experiencing about 4,800 apprehensions a day in a 24-hour period. Our agents are doing a phenomenal job across the entire southwest border managing that. I'm not having to decompress flights like I was having to do 3 and 4 months ago. We're able to repatriate more individuals to their host country now than we ever have. 31 flights last week, 35 flights this week. We need to continue these consequences in order to affect the right response and the right effect across these border situations.
And Chief, I know I'm out of time, but you and I were in a hearing in D.C. on Tuesday. With us was an admiral from the Coast Guard. That admiral testified that mass immigration is a national security issue. Do you agree with his assessment?
Yes, sir.
I now recognize Mr. Bishop of North Carolina.
Chief Ortiz, I think you came in here to tell the truth today, sit down and offer some candor to this congressional committee. And I want to start off by telling you that that is a breath of fresh air, and it is inconsistent with what I've heard over and over from administration officials so far. You have candidly acknowledged in responses to questions already that we do not have operational control of the border. You've effectively acknowledged that the border is not secure on much of the southwestern border. I think you might be trying to walk a fine line because you don't want to be insubordinate to your superiors, but if there's ever been a time for candor to a congressional committee, it is right now. And I'm going to ask you about the cause. You've continued to, your written testimony, I'm sure that's substantially prepared or revised in Washington, starts off, evolving global and regional events continue to produce challenging conditions and trends along the southwestern border. You trace the beginning of the fantastic climb in illegal immigration across the border to COVID. I heard you say earlier today, changing conditions. Chief, in fiscal year 2020, the policy was detain and remove. The entire objective was to avoid releasing any illegal immigrant for any reason. In 2021, Secretary Mayorkas, the new administration, gutted all of those policies. MPP, safe third countries, family detention, asylum bars, T-42 for minors, etc. Record numbers resulted. Record numbers followed. Let me say that, because I'm going to ask you whether it was result or cause. Be it parole, NTA, NTR, etc., illegals are apprehended by Border Patrol but allowed to remain non-detained in the U.S. Now, I want some candor, Chief. Do you acknowledge, as the Chief of the Border Patrol, that the driver of the crisis that you have described, of this dramatic change in flow, the policy is the policy of this administration to release instead of detain or remove illegal immigrants? That's my question.
Congressman Bishop, thank you for the question. I will tell you that law enforcement is pretty simple, sir. You have to have capacity and you have to have consequences. And anytime you don't have consequences, you're certainly going to see some increases. And we continue to try and repatriate individuals back to countries that we can repatriate. But it's been a challenge for us because what we saw this past year were individuals from Cuba, individuals from Haiti, individuals from Nicaragua, where we have a difficult time repatriating. It's not my responsibility. I work closely with my ICE partners to make sure that we're able to expel or, return individuals back to their host countries. But it has been a significant challenge for us, and I do think that has been a driver of some of the increases that we have seen.
So you've attenuated that a little bit, Chief. I appreciate, again, I think you've been candid in that answer. But you've attenuated it. It's a driver of some of the increases. Sir, we're all familiar with this chart. I mean, we see it in our sleep, right? I came into Congress down here in fiscal year 2020. And I visited as soon as I came down to the border then, and I saw the empty port of entry station where nobody was in there flooded. You'd seen the films from back in May. And here's where we are now, sir. That was December, worst in history, and we've been up in that territory for years. And there's always been 1 billion people live on less than $1 a day. Poor, as Chairman Green said. The cause is the change in policy. Is it not, sir? Will you be candid enough to be unequivocal and clear that that has driven the change?
I will tell you, sir, that when I was a deputy chief and the acting chief down here in 2014, a lot of people described what was happening here in South Texas as a humanitarian crisis, a border crisis. And I was very candid, and I said that I think we have a bit of a policy crisis. And I still hold true that we have some policies in place where we need to ensure that the men and women out there patrolling the border, investigating these criminal cartels, are actually allowed to do their job each and every day.
And their job is to detain or remove illegal immigrants?
Yes, sir.
And you've talked about And your pride, look, I want to say this, your pride in the men and women you lead, and I know what the circumstances is that compels you to come in here and show this level of candor to this congressional committee, and that's the men and women that you're serving, because they're under stress like they've never seen. And it is an abomination, it is despicable that people in Washington would set policy that would cause that to those men and women, and that would cause the inhumane destruction of lives that you see to migrants who are coming over in these conditions, and that would cause the devastation that's spreading throughout the United States in consequence of that. I want to thank you for telling the Congress what your duty compels you to tell us, which is the truth. Thank you, Chief Ortiz.
Gentleman yields. I recognize Mr. Jimenez from Florida.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Chief Ortiz, for your candor. You're in a tough spot, okay, and I know. I have a question for you. Supposedly we have 1.3 million getaways that we know of. What is your estimate of the people that we don't know about that got away?
Thank you, Congressman Jimenez, and good to see you again, sir. I will tell you that the got-away number is a number that, for a long time, was associated with art. It was our agents out there actually cutting swaths of country and using, footprints as an indicator as to what we were seeing out there. That was our situational awareness. With the investments that this Congress has made into the Border Patrol, CBP as a whole, we have greater situational awareness now than I've ever had. My confidence level in that got-away number continues to increase. Is it 100%? No, sir. At 385,000 gotaways so far this fiscal year, we continue to refine that number. I've got to do a better job of accounting for the actual encounters.
Chief, I have limited time. I just need a number. What percentage of the 1.3 that you know got away, how much more do you think got away that you don't know about? In
my estimation, based upon the situational awareness that I have, probably be between 10 and 20%, sir.
More?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Cagen, HSI, I equate the chemicals coming from mainly China as being the weapons, and then I equate the cartels as being the soldiers. You spoke a lot about the weapon, trying to stop the flow of the drug or the precursor chemicals, et cetera, et cetera. I didn't hear much about the soldiers, the cartels themselves. What are you doing about the soldiers?
Thank you for the question. Good to see you again. The cartels, the TCOs as a whole, we investigate them together. So you're breaking it up separately. We don't break it up separately because one needs the other back and forth. The work that we're doing to go after the cartels in Mexico and push the borders out is definitely done on the ground with our men and women within all of the U.S. government, and our partnerships. One thing that we are strong with is the partnerships with Mexico. I do understand that over the years, different political pressures in different areas swing, but on the ground, as HSI working with our partners, we have great partnerships. A huge vetted unit that is very strong. I believe it's just around 60 active criminal investigations on the drug cartels as we speak today, and they're very strong in how they operate.
Is that being conducted investigations in Mexico? Are they going to be charged in Mexico? Are they going to be charged in the United States? Where are these soldiers going to be charged? And
it depends. It depends on the investigation, the level of the investigation, whether it's the leaders of the cartel, whether it's the henchmen, whatever it may be. It depends on where they're prosecuted. We extradite people often to come in front of a jury here in the U.S., but we also then help, and this is why we're so strong with our Mexican partners, because we work cases that are mutually beneficial. So if they're trying to go after corruption,
again, I only have limited time, and I need to get to some points that I want to make. Sorry to cut you off.
That's fine, sir.
Okay. Would it surprise you, according to the LA Times, Mexican overdoses, people that died in Mexico, okay, numbered something like 1,700 in 2020. They numbered over 100,000 here in the United States. And even taking into account the difference in population, by my math, it's like 25 we are 25 times more likely to have an overdose death in the United States than we are in Mexico, which seems kind of strange to me, seeing that that's where the stuff is produced. So it's one of two things. Either they're vastly underreporting the overdose deaths in Mexico, which then would make the Mexican people go a little bit, be perturbed at their leadership for not doing something about it, or there's something going on, some kind of unwritten rule that maybe they produce it there and they don't really sell it there, they don't push it there, but they do push it up here. So I'm really disturbed about that. And so these numbers continue to rise. We don't have control of the southern border. The testimony from the chief says that the cartels now control the southern border, many portions of the southern border, and these soldiers are killing 100,000 Americans. And so I'm not sure what it is that you're doing, but whatever you're doing, I don't think it's enough at this point. Sorry. Thank you. My time is up.
Gentleman yields, and I recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Fluger.
Thank you, Chairman. America, wake up. Look over here to the side, to the colleagues that should be here, to my Democrat colleagues. How disrespectful is it? Chief, thank you for being here. Director, thank you for being here. Please tell everyone in your organization thank you for their service. It's extremely disrespectful of my Democrat colleagues to not be here, to not support those who would put their lives on the line to keep our country safe. America needs to wake up to that fact. Chairman Thompson said last year that he would have a border hearing, and he never did. And now he's acting as a partisan agent. Chief Ortiz, we were in Del Rio under that bridge together with the 20,000 Haitian migrants. We've been in El Paso together. We've been here together. You've mentioned that we don't have operational control of the border, that in over 50% of the southwest border that it's not secure. You've talked about capacity and consequences. And my question for you is, have you shared, as the expert, I'd like you to channel that first and second year Agent Ortiz, Officer Ortiz, the tactical expert. Have you shared your recommendations of how to secure the border with Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas?
I would tell you that the Secretary and I have candid conversations about what's happening on the southwest border, and we are exploring every opportunity to make sure that we continue to add capacity for the men and women out there. So to answer your question, yes, I have shared my operational experiences from the last 32 years with the Secretary.
So one of those has been consequences. Every agent that I talk to, hundreds of agents that work within CBP, have mentioned that they don't believe that there are consequences, that they don't believe. And you've mentioned the repatriation flights. Is the Secretary listening to your recommendations? Because it certainly appears that that's not happening.
Yes, I will tell you that the Secretary and myself have increased consequences for criminal aliens. We've seen more criminal aliens apprehended in the last 24 months than we've seen previously, and we continue to prosecute, work with our DOJ partners and our AUSAs across the southwest border. We are sitting at about a 93% acceptance rate. Certainly not enough. We need to add more capacity. We need to have more assistant U.S. attorneys. We need to have more prosecutions agents so we can ensure that we instill those consequences that you described. But I will say that we have increased the level of prosecutions across the southwest border in the neighborhood of about 35%. And so that needs to continue, sir.
Chief, when you look at the cartels and the fact that they're making billions of dollars off of the human trafficking, the smuggling of drugs, the humanitarian crisis. 53 people died in a tractor trailer in July of last year south of San Antonio, not too far from here. Do you believe that the cartels are acting as a terrorist organization?
Whether they're acting as a terrorist organization or a criminal organization, I think that the Border Patrol, CBP, DHS, all of our partner agencies need to concentrate their efforts against the cartels, because they certainly are working both in the human trafficking arena as well as the narcotics trafficking arena. And we recognize that they have expanded their capabilities immensely. And so I think it's got to be a whole of government approach. And for me, They are criminals. They are 100% criminal organizations.
Do you believe that we are acting as a whole of government approach to prevent the cartels from what they're doing?
I will tell you from a law enforcement perspective, we've got tremendous partnerships, and we're going to continue to do that. Once again, I believe it's a capacity issue. We need more officers on the front lines.
Do you think we can do more?
Yes, sir.
Director Cagen, you've seized 3.3 million pounds of precursor chemicals. How much money have the cartels profited as a result of shipping that fentanyl? I'm looking at several sheriffs behind you from my district who are experiencing the trauma, the chaos from fentanyl in our own communities. How much money are the cartels making year in and year out?
I don't have the specific answer for you, but we have a fentanyl problem, and we need to fix it. And
how do we fix that problem?
I agree with the chief. More capacity building, more people on the border to secure the border, as well as more investigative efforts. We have to surge our resources to the border, which is what we do, and we have done it for years. Operation Expanded Impact is HSI's framework that we utilize to surge resources to the border in times like this. But it hits a point where there's so drugs coming across and humans coming across that we need more resources on the border, especially when I mentioned that CBP Office of Field Operations is going to increase their non-inspection capabilities. It's only going to create more responses to the ports of entry, more investigations, which is more resources that HSI will need in order to combat and investigate these transnational criminal organizations.
Thank you, Chairman. My time has expired. Yield back.
Gentleman yields. The chair recognizes Ms. Green from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chief Ortiz, for being here today. Thank you, Mr. Cagen. I appreciate the jobs that you do, as well as the men and women that work under you. They have very difficult jobs, and we are so appreciative of them. But I'm going to be very honest with both of you. After listening to all of this, I am so angry. I cannot believe the incredible failure of our federal government and to the American people. And also to the Border Patrol agents, ICE agents, the jobs that they do and how incredibly difficult their jobs are based on the failed policies that they are forced to operate under. It is absurd. I live in Georgia. My state is not a border state, but let me inform you of some of the things that we're dealing with. Here in Georgia, fentanyl-involved deaths has increased by over 230% since Biden has taken office. In my district alone, we have had fentanyl-involved deaths increase by over 350%. I can tell you right now, the policies do not work. And we are sick and tired of our young people dying, our emergency responders getting poisoned by fentanyl. This is unacceptable. Chief Ortiz, are you aware that there was an explosive device found by Border Patrol agents on January 17th in an area called No Man's Land, and there's surveillance of who put it there? And guess what? It wasn't Americans, it was cartels. Are you aware of that?
Thank you, Congresswoman, and good to see you again. I will tell you that some of this information that I receive in a confidential skiff, so I'm going to be a little hesitant of briefing what I know and what I don't know with respect to some of an event like that.
I understand, Chief Ortiz, but I'm not going to be confidential because I think people deserve to know. Our Border Patrol agents should not be in those type of conditions where they are at risk of being blown to pieces by the cartels, who, by the way, are criminals, and they should be treated as such. As a matter of fact, I've co-sponsored legislation to declare war on the cartels because they are definitely declaring war on us, the American people, and our Border Patrol agents, and I've had enough of it. And I know Americans have had enough of it. Mr. Cagen, are you aware of such explosive device being found by Border Patrol agents?
I am not.
Mr. Cagen, since you have to deal greatly in all the horrific drugs that are poisoning Americans every day, let's talk about kids for a little bit. We were just told this morning that kids aged 13 to 17 are being recruited by the cartels, dangerous cartels, even MS-13, and they are being used to smuggle drugs, traffic drugs into our country, having it taped across their bodies. They're also recruited because many of them have U.S. citizenship because they've come in our country, and they're used to drive and smuggle humans and drugs back and forth across our border. Can you elaborate on that?
Thank you, and good to see you as well. The cartels are very good, and transnational criminal organizations are very good at going after vulnerable populations. You see that with the immigrants that are coming up. You see that with, as you're talking about, kids. This is something that has gone on for a long time. I worked in Mexico for 4 years. So here, seeing cartels, seeing TCOs go after vulnerable children and vulnerable populations is something that definitely happens. They will go after any vulnerable population in order to move their drugs north and or move their guns and profits south.
Yes,
so,
but
yes,
Mr. Cagen, let me interrupt you for a minute. This has been a large increase in just the past 2 years in how many teenagers and even children are being used to traffic drugs. The increase is there, and it's showing that the policies are failing.
I'm sorry, ma'am, I didn't catch the question.
I said there's been a large increase in children being used trafficking drugs into our country and being recruited by gangs, and it's just happened in the past few years, and the policies are failing. So what change needs to be made?
I don't have data on the increase in children being used. My time that I'm speaking about goes all the way back into 2007 to 2010 when I was in New Mexico. So I don't have any comment on increase or decrease. So that's not, as an investigative arm of DHS, not here to focus on.
Well, I can tell you right now, I have the statistics. Deaths of 350% in the past 2 years in my district from fentanyl. That's proof that the increase is there, and we are devastated.
Sorry, I didn't mean to be disingenuous. There is definitely increase in fentanyl coming here. There's definitely, we all have seen the increase in death in children. I was just on a panel a few months ago sitting next to 3 parents who had lost their children. It's the hardest time that I've ever had to testify in my entire life.
Then I think, you know what I think, you guys, and I'm going to be really honest with everyone, I could care less about politics at this point. All I care about is policies put in place that allow our great men and women to do their job to secure our country. And our country is not safe, and our people are being poisoned by fentanyl every single day. I cannot believe it's the #1 cause of death of people from ages 18 to 45. That is unacceptable. And I think that we need to all be honest, and who cares about who our boss is and who cares about who's in office? We need to be honest and forthcoming about the changes that need to be made to secure our country, because America is all of our home. It doesn't matter about Republican, Democrat, or who cares. It's everybody's home. And what I would like to see done is real frank conversation about what to do to fix this problem. Thank you very much.
The gentlelady yields. The chair recognizes Mr. LaLotta from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Chief and Director, for being here. Most of us in this room and back at home learned in about the 11th grade that in the legislative branch, we pass the laws and we appropriate and authorize the money, and the executive branch enforces the laws and spends that money. And my question is to you, Chief, with respect to fiber optic sensors and light posts, because the frustration the Congress and this committee is, we've done our job. We've authorized the money. The appropriators have appropriated that money. We've sent resources to the executive branch. But we're frustrated that the President and Secretary Mayorkas have failed to enforce those laws and properly utilize those resources. So my question with respect to the fiber optic sensors, which we understand are an important piece to our border security, can you tell us the status of these sensors? Are they on? Where do they exist? And have any of them been turned off, Chief?
So I'm going to work that backwards. Thank you, Congressman, for the question. None of them have been turned off. We have them deployed across various locations along the southwest border. I would prefer not to share exactly the location, but I will tell you that we continue to expand the linear ground detection system in areas where where 300 miles of infrastructure was slated to be constructed. That is an ongoing project. We continue to make those investments. We are quite often in the real estate and the environmental process. I checked with my team actually this morning, and even here in South Texas, we have ongoing deployments of underground sensors throughout the area of responsibility.
Chief, would the addition of more fiber optic sensors increase our border security?
Most definitely, sir. We have areas along the southwest border where perhaps your traditional infrastructure, a wall or barrier system, may not be as beneficial both to the community, to the ranchers, to the farmers, and perhaps maybe a virtual linear ground detection system might be the best course of action. And in those areas, we are certainly working hard to make sure that those systems are deployed.
Chief, with respect to the permitting process, we understand and respect people's personal property rights, but can you explain and describe some of the frustrations you've seen with some of the permitting process, Chief?
So across the southwest border, we deal with private landowners, we deal with the federal government refuge property, we deal with certainly areas that are protected lands. And so all of that creates a challenge for us. The Secretary has leveraged his CADX authority to allow us to continue some of these programs and initiatives to ensure that we have those tools that allow us to have situational awareness out there along the southwest border. We're closing gates and gaps. We've already closed 55 of the gates and gaps, and we're remediating the levee system here in South Texas and some of the other areas. And so this idea that, you know, we turned off all infrastructure is inaccurate. We continue to propose recommendations that represent life safety or threats into the community, and we've seen approvals on several of those projects already.
Can you describe how long some of the permitting process takes, and what, if anything, is holding you up from the installation of some of this new fiber optic capability?
So it varies depending on location. What we've seen here in South Texas, some of the records, the real estate and who owns the property are sometimes go back multiple generations, and so that becomes a tremendous challenge for our real estate experts. And then in some other areas, it moves quite rapidly. So it just varies depending on location. And I will tell you that in the last 24 months, 36 months that I've been up at Washington, D.C., I can continue to push the infrastructure program as well as the underground detection system, because I do think it is probably the wave of the future.
Please continue to give that feedback, Chief. Moving on to the light posts. Have any of the light posts been turned off?
No, sir. None of the light posts have been turned off. We are challenged with some of the remote video sensor camera systems. There's a backlog with the supply chain issues that we experience both in our fleet and some of the technology. We're starting to catch up over the last 6 months.
And can you describe the lack of operational lampposts and what that could do to border security?
So the inability to have situation awareness, to not have the border areas lit up or have camera systems deployed really decreases my confidence in the got-away number. And so we want to maintain as much situational awareness out in that border environment, and all of those are tools that we leverage in every sector along the southwest border.
Thanks, Chief. Chairman, I yield.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Ms. Lee from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last week, a federal judge in the Northern District of Florida, Kent Wetherill, ruled that the Biden administration's policy of parole and alternatives to detention is unlawful. The judge stated, in part, that the administration had effectively turned the southwest border into a meaningless line in the sand and little more than a speed bump for aliens flooding into the country. Chief Ortiz, my question for you is this. Were you aware of Judge Wetherill's ruling and his conclusion about that parole and alternatives to detention policy?
Congresswoman Lee, thank you for the question. And yes, I am aware. I was deposed for that case, and then on January 10th, I was in testimony before the judge in Florida. So I was aware of his final ruling last week.
To this point, have any of the policies related to parole and alternatives to detention been modified or adjusted in light of the court's ruling?
So we weren't paroling over the last several months. Our numbers in the last 60 days have dropped significantly. We're averaging about 4,800 apprehensions. So there wasn't a requirement for us to parole. We release to detention or to ICE enforcement removal operations, and then we've been able to leverage Title 42 considerably. And so we haven't had to leverage that over the last 60 days.
So to this point, have any of the policies at Border Patrol been modified or adjusted, or had to have been modified or adjusted in light of the court's ruling?
In light of the court's ruling, what we did is we informed all sectors that they were not to parole individuals outside of specific individual case for a humanitarian reason, or if somebody was a material witness in a human trafficking case.
And to your knowledge, are there any plans to make further modifications, or do you feel like the changes that have been made so far are adequate?
I think the changes that have been made so far are adequate, ma'am.
Okay. I'd like to return to the discussion of infrastructure. And specifically, we know that during this administration, the border wall itself, construction on the border wall itself, was halted. Did that halting of construction include shutting off other technology installations like lighting and roads and other things attendant to that construction?
Yeah, the proposed requirement of 750 miles of border wall infrastructure included roads, lighting, and camera systems. We currently have about 450 miles of border wall constructed along the southwest border. We had some projects that were midway through the construction process. And so what we have done is looked at all of those projects individually and have submitted a request to the Secretary to have approval to continue those projects. He has granted approval in, I believe, 29 of those projects already, and we have an additional slate of projects that we're going to be presenting to him and others to make sure that we can try and get those approved as quickly as possible.
So would it be accurate to say that completion of the wall and those attendant structures, the lights, the roads, the things you described, would be helpful to you and the agents who are out there and performing your job?
Yes, ma'am. One of the things that the Secretary and I firmly agree on, that infrastructure is important to securing the southwest border.
Thank you. And with that, I'd like to turn to ports of entry and a discussion there. So is it accurate to say that drug cartels are operating both at ports of entry and then also coming across the border and operating through places that are not designated ports of entry?
With respect to narcotics, what we've seen this fiscal year is 101% increase in fentanyl seizures in between the ports of entry. So far, 1,117 pounds of fentanyl have been seized by our Border Patrol agents in between the ports of entry. Secretary directed us 2 weeks ago to start a fentanyl-driven operation, not just the Border Patrol, but our field operations officers at our ports of entry, and to include our ICE investigators, and we are partnering with DEA to take the fight to the cartels, specifically in certain locations. And so this is a priority for us, and I'm excited that we're going to be able to show some significant results based upon adding additional resources in certain areas.
Thank you, Chief. And with that, my time has expired. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentlelady yields. I now recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Luttrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief Ortiz, thank you for your service. Mr. Cagen, you as well. Chief, are you a direct report to Secretary Mayorkas?
There is a commissioner and a deputy commissioner in between the Secretary and myself.
Do you communicate with them often?
I communicate often with the Secretary, several times a week, sir.
So I want to piggyback off of what Ms. Green said, because we were just read in on this explosive device that was discovered by one of your Border Patrol agents. Now, obviously, sir, you're aware of this. How is it that you are not?
Because as the investigative arm of the department, we're focused on investigating TCOs, and the intelligence shared between our two agencies is robust. It happens all the time. We're not actively. It's
so
not
here's my issue. This is one of the issues I see between and I respect everything that both of you do and everybody that works for you, but the breakdown of communication and the silos that we work in is what's detrimental to this country right now. And if there is an explosive device, if the cartels are using explosive device against our agents, that changes the narrative.
So can I answer my job as the assistant director over countering transnational organized crime is not domestic operations. Our domestic operations folks that work in the field day in and day out are the ones that communicate with the Border Patrol. I'm saying, me personally, I do not know. I can get back to you and let you know whether HSI as a whole knows and our domestic operations knows. So I just wanted to clarify that point.
Thank you. So I would assume that the two individuals that you report to, sir, have reported to Secretary Mayorkas about this explosive device, which tells me that Mayorkas has reported this to the president, and nothing has been said or done to the American public, and Congress had no idea this was going on. Now, if this is the case, and we're surging money, billions, hundreds of billions of dollars across the seas to secure everybody else, and we're not doing anything here in my state, in our southern border, that's a problem, because that means that they're lying to us. Response?
I will tell you that if there's a significant event along the southwest border, whether it's a significant seizure or an arrest, I'm
not talking about drugs anymore. I'm talking about explosives.
Any significant event, whether it be a terrorist, whether it be a significant narcotics load, criminal alien, high-value target, we will coordinate with our investigative partners, and they vary in numbers, whether it's FBI, whether it's the DEA, or our HSI partners. We all belong to Joint Terrorism Task Force. If it's associated with terrorism, every single one of us has an agent or a task force member, and so that information is shared amongst that group.
It hasn't been shared with us, okay? And so here's my problem. If you share something of this nature with us, we can help, okay? Another question, Chief. You said consequences, and you said that your agents don't feel like they have legislation, or that legislation is not enforced to support them in their duties. Who specifically is telling you not to do that? What memo and whose name is on the bottom of that so we can go after them?
When I say consequences, I'm talking about two things. I'm talking about prosecutions, and I'm talking about repatriations back to their home country. We have to have those tools in our toolkit to be able to deal with the migrant surges that we're seeing right now. With respect to legislative changes or policy changes, that's out of my wheelhouse, Congressman. That is your responsibility. That's the administration's responsibility. My responsibility is to enforce the laws on the books and do everything I can to make sure our men and women have the tools that they need out there to do the job.
Okay, so tell me right now which ones you need that are in place that they're not being enforced so we can do something about that. And if you don't have that in front of you right now, please get it to me.
I will, sir.
Could I interrupt as the chairman just a second? I want to make sure I understand Mr. Luttrell's questions. You're asking which policies need to be reinstated in order for him to do his job?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry if that didn't come out clearly. I apologize.
That's okay. Go ahead, Chief.
Once again, whatever consequences, you can call it migrant protection protocols, you can call it remain in Mexico, you can call it a safe third country. All of the tools that the Border Patrol and DHS have at their disposal are going to allow us to do a better job of managing this border.
I yield back, sir.
The gentleman yields. And I now recognize Mr. Strong from Alabama.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Chief. Thank you all for being here today.
Not that I'm aware of, sir.
There we go. Thank you. Well, we'll go with this one then. 4.7 million apprehended, 1.3 million evaded, potentially 20 more percent than that. Improvised explosive device being used against U.S. law enforcement. America protects other countries' borders. Chief, do you think it's time that the United States President sends the military to the southern border to protect the American people?
Sir, we have our DOD partners operating along the southwest border. As I mentioned earlier, I was down there yesterday evening and the day before, working side by side with our National Guardsmen, our Texas Department of Public Safety partners, and a slew of law enforcement agencies. I will tell you that, to me, Border Patrol work should be done by Border Patrol agents. We do have, I think, opportunities to leverage our partners. Back in 2012, I had 21,370 Border Patrol agents. Right now, I have 19,016. My requirement is 22,000 Border Patrol agents. Until I can get there, I'm going to require assistance from other agencies, to include the Department of Defense. But right now, for me, my priority is doing everything I can to add more personnel to my ranks, so we can make sure that Border Patrol agents that are out there doing that job.
And I thank you, and I think it's time to get 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue on the phone, let them know what's going on down here. I also would like to ask you, Mr. Cagen, your office is responsible for leading efforts to counter transnational crimes. This includes combating drugs, illegal weapons, and money laundering. Has your agency seen an increase in criminal activity over the last 2 years as it relates to the surge at the border?
Naturally, the surge at the border is going to create more activity because, as I mentioned, the transnational criminal organizations will target the vulnerable populations. And when you have the vulnerable population moving up towards the border and towards the ports of entry, it's going to cause more activity. And that is the reason for our Operation Expanded Impact, which is the framework that HSI utilizes in order to surge special agents to the southwest border in order to support the increased activity.
Thank you. Who are the main perpetrators of transnational criminal activity along the southern border?
The cartels.
Thank you. If we return to the operational policies under the previous administration, Chief Ortiz, how long would it take to get the border under control?
Every policy that allows us to repatriate or reduce the flow of migrants is certainly going to increase our operational effectiveness and our ability to control that border. Once again, we're dealing with a different population group. I think it's going to be a real challenge for us to repatriate some folks from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua. So we have to make sure that we have a tool for those populations, not just folks from Central America or Mexico.
Thank you. There's people out there that can talk about him all they want, but Donald Trump kept our country safe. Under the Trump administration, ICE air was fueled up 24/7, and those that came to the United States illegally were detained and removed to their country of origin immediately, and not turned loose and asked to come to a hearing months later. They're coming from Mexico, they're coming from Guatemala, El Salvador, Ecuador, Colombia, Cuba, Haiti, Iran, and they're coming from China too. Our country is under attack. America is being invaded. No American is safe. This invasion is not a Democratic issue. It is not a Republican issue. It is an American issue. We have learned more in these hours than we've heard out of D.C. in I don't know how many weeks. I'm a freshman United States congressman. I've been in office for 9 weeks, and we're learning more here than we've heard in the last 9 weeks. I thank each of you, but I can tell you this. The thing I'm most distraught about, there's not a Democrat here. This is an American issue. It's appalling that the Democrats didn't show up and America is under attack. I thank both of you for being here.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Burkeen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief, you've got courage. I see you trying to be respectful, and I also see you being straightforward, and I want to appreciate you for doing that. For you to admit that we don't have operational control at our southern border, again, you've done that in a respectful manner, and you've done that in a straightforward manner, and that took guts. You said a while ago that in 2014 you were plain spoken as well, and said that we had a policy crisis. Just for the American people, so we can revisit history, who was president in 2014?
Mr. Obama, sir.
Thank you. Did we have a policy crisis soon after, from 2016 to 2020, during the Trump administration?
I will tell you that in 2019, when I was deputy chief here, we had a family unit crisis. And so to me, I thought that at that time, we had some vulnerabilities, and we addressed that relatively quickly.
So if I understand you correctly, there was quick action during the 2016 to 2020 timeframe to address the areas that you saw as needing improvement.
Well, I'm not sure I actually agree with how we did it. Separating families was a significant challenge for our organization. And I will tell you that, once again, there's got to be another way to solve some of the issues that we're faced with right now.
Did you feel like we had operational control from 2016 to 2020 of the southern border?
There were times, and there were certain locations where the effectiveness rate of our southwest border was above 90%, 85%. And in those areas, I had extreme confidence of what was happening along the southwest border.
That's great. I appreciate your response on that. 90% is much better than what we heard a while ago of 5 sectors lacking operational control out of 9 on the southern border. You mentioned consequences. I'm grateful for you for using that word. It seems like a word that's missing in public dialogue on this. And so Title 42, our president is expected to let that lapse come the month of May. Would you support finding alternative means to continue Title 42, whether it's the 18 to 45 age frame leading cause of death that's caused 70,000 overdoses last year? Would you support continuance of a measure, health emergency, even if it had to be fentanyl based, to continue the protocol of sending people back to their country of origin?
Any tool or resource that allows law enforcement personnel to repatriate or affect some sort of consequence on individuals that we encounter is going to be a useful tool. Yes, sir.
Do you support the Remain in Mexico policy?
I support any policy that's going to allow us to repatriate individuals back to their home country.
You also said earlier that you and Secretary Mayorkas agreed, quote, infrastructure is important. Secretary Mayorkas and I agree on this. The wall and physical barriers. Our President of the United States in 2016 as a United States Senator voted for the Secure Fence Act. As the United States, at a time, Democrats and Republicans believed in physical barriers. Do you support the concept of construction of physical barriers like a wall? And do you believe they're effectual for the manpower element that they allow you and your Border Patrol agents to then reallocate elsewhere?
And Congressman, I do not believe in a wall from sea to shining sea, but I do believe in infrastructure and barrier systems in concentrated areas, especially urban areas. And that's always been our practice from 2006 when I was an agent in charge in West Texas to now. But I also don't agree that we should tear down perfectly good barrier system to install something that is, based upon requirements that we developed over the last few years. We tore down perfectly good infrastructure system in some areas that we should have just left alone. Del Rio was a perfect example of that.
So under the prior administration, we had 200 plus a wall that was appropriated, and the President of the United States, President Biden, by executive order, shut that down. Do you disagree with his decision to shut down the construction?
Yes, sir.
And my last question, we have a Mobile One app that's coming online. It's being utilized. Do you believe all that is doing is the Mobile One app leading to more utilization of consequences or less utilization of consequences?
The mobile CBP One app is actually part of the process to ensure that these migrants have an opportunity to schedule an appointment with an asylum officer without having to put their lives in the hands of the cartels or the smuggling organizations. That's a new system. As with any new system, it takes a while for it to develop, and we continue to expand that. One of the things that we recognized about a month ago, as we heard feedback from our non-governmental organization partners, is that there were some gaps, some language gaps, and some gaps that the migrants generally couldn't understand within the app itself. And so we worked with our NGO partners to make some adjustments, and we continue to expand that as much as we possibly can. But I do think it's part of an effective system so folks who want to apply for some sort of immigration benefit can do it from their home country.
I thank you. I yield.
The gentleman yields. And first, let me ask for unanimous consent of the committee on something. We'll go technical, and then I'll introduce our next questioner. So without objection, the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. De La Cruz, is permitted to sit on this hearing and ask questions of the witness. Are there any objections? Hearing none, it is my privilege to welcome to the committee the gentlewoman from Texas whose district we actually now sit in. The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to my colleagues for allowing me this time to be here with you today. You know, the failed Biden border policy has made technology even more important to keep our American communities safe, to keep our Border Patrol agents safe, and to keep our nation safe. With that being said, the RGV sector, which includes McAllen, Texas, right here where I have the honor and the privilege to represent, has one of the highest drone detections along the southwest border. The cartel drone detections just right here in the Rio Grande Valley sector in fiscal year 2022 was 35,000 drone detections. I'm going to repeat that number for you all because we don't hear it enough. 35,000 drone detections from the cartel that are watching our agents, watching our American communities, and leading illegal immigrants through our southwest border. That being said, out of the 35,000 drone detections, only 10,000 were intercepted. That's it, 10,000. To put this in perspective, the RGV sector only has 31 drones assigned to this sector. Let me repeat that number, 31 drones. And out of those 31, only 18 are actually operational and assigned. The others are down due to maintenance and other issues. So while the cartel have an abundance of resources and have unlimited money to be here on our border, the RGV sector, our agents, our chief, are only left with 31 drones to intercept this. Now, this type of unbalance is unacceptable in the RGV that continues to have high illegal immigration and high illegal drugs crossing our border. That being said, there's other high persistent surveillance, which includes aerostats. There were 7 aerostats here in the RGV sector, and due to lack of funding, 3 have been decommissioned, and the remaining 4 are going to be defunded by the end of this year. With that being said, Chief Ortiz, what is the department currently doing to assist with countering the cartel technology? And again, 35,000 that we detected in the last year.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Good to see you. I will tell you that technology is probably a priority, or no, definitely is a priority for myself and my leadership. Whether it's South Texas or whether it's Arizona, the SUAS issue, as you know, cartels have deep pockets. They don't have to worry about policy. I have to worry about policy. We have 201 small UAS systems deployed throughout the country, and I intend to continue to expand that at great levels over the next 24 months. We have a counter UAS program, as you might be familiar with, and we continue to expand that because we recognize that the cartels have become awfully sophisticated, and a smuggler no longer has to leave the Mexican side to smuggle a group of migrants or narcotics across the border. He can do it virtually via a phone app and a SUAS. And so we need to continue to expand that footprint, but our policies also have to match that. We have to be able to mitigate those 35,000 drone incursions that you just described. We are on the process, or in a process of mitigating a lot of those criminal organizations and being able to exploit where they're coming from, how they're doing it, and we're going to continue to expand that as much as we can. And then with respect to the aerostats, I'm a big fan of aerostats. When I was in Afghanistan, and I think some of the committee members will recall that aerostats kept us safe. And when I came down here in 2013, I was the architect of the aerostat program here in South Texas. And when I went up to headquarters, I expanded it across multiple locations across the southwest border. But it is an expensive piece of technology, and I have to find an alternative for that.
Now, Chief Ortiz, can you tell the committee and the members here that are in the audience, can you tell us how deep into American soil have these cartel drones actually come in?
So it'll vary. Some of the drone technology that the cartels are using are very sophisticated, and we've seen incursions miles away from the immediate border area. For us, we are doing, I think, a tremendous job of identifying where these criminal organizations are operating out of, but we need to expand that.
So in my debriefings with Border Patrol, I have heard that these drones from the cartels have come up to 8 miles into American land. Would you say that is an accurate statement?
No, ma'am.
How far do you believe that they come into American soil?
I think it depends on terrain. A lot of areas along the southwest border are very mountainous when you think about what we have in Arizona and El Paso. But then when you think about what we're dealing with here in South Texas and in some areas in West Texas, pretty flat country. So cartels can operate via line of sight. And once again, it really depends on their ability to leverage existing systems, whether it's cell phones and whatnot.
We just recently lost some of those aerostat balloons in this past January. So what is the measure that the department is using to fill the gap until we get to the next step?
We currently have a team deployed and looking at some alternatives to a similar type of platform, but that's less expensive. What we've seen in the past with aerostats is in these areas, high winds.
Chief Ortiz, I'm sorry, I'm out of time. I'm just going to ask you, how fast can we deploy some of this technology?
We're hoping to deploy it in the next 6 months, ma'am.
Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields. I want to thank our panel of witnesses for their incredibly valuable testimony today. And Mr. Cagen, I want to especially thank you. You were a Democrat-invited witness, and you showed up. So thank you for that. The folks who invited you bailed on you, but thank you both for your service to our country and for being here today. And the members of the committee, they may have some additional questions for you. They'll submit them in writing, and it would be great if you could get that back in writing. The witnesses are dismissed, and our committee stands in recess for 15 minutes.
Well done. Well done.
Great.
Testing.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll get started here in just a couple of minutes if the members could make their way to the dais.
We got such a good chairman.
And we're waiting on Sheriff Coe and a few other members. Or we got all the members okay? Can you guys find our other witness for us? Thanks, Ryan. While we're off the record here, and I want to thank the media for being here. All of you that are back there with your cameras. I know sometimes people criticize the media, but I just want to thank you for being here today. The story of what occurred in our first round of testimony needs to be told, and I deeply appreciate your presence here. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, go ahead.
While we're waiting, I would offer to write their headline for them. U.S. Border Patrol admits that we do not have operational control of the southern border, that it is not secure, and that Biden administration policy is the cause. That's what he said. The candor was astonishing.
It was.
Wouldn't it be nice if we could get that from other administration officials and get it on a regular basis? I yield back to me.
All right. Well, we will go ahead and get started. The committee will come to order, and I'm pleased to welcome our second panel of witnesses. I ask that the witnesses please rise and raise their right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you give before the Committee on Homeland Security of the United States House of Representatives will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record reflect that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. Thank you. I would now like to formally introduce our second panel of witnesses. Stephen McGraw has served as the Director and Colonel of the Texas Department of Public Safety since 2009. He's served in both Texas and federal law enforcement since 1977 in various capacities across our entire country. As frontline leader for a state that is among the most affected by the crisis at our southern border, Mr. McGraw's insights and expertise are invaluable. Brad Coe is Sheriff of Kinney County, Texas, a border county that has faced the very real effects of this crisis. Sheriff Coe has firsthand experience in encountering illegal aliens and protecting his community. We thank the sheriff for making the drive over and look forward to hearing what he has to say today. And Chris Cabrera is the Vice President of the National Border Patrol Council, a labor union representing the Border Patrol agents and support personnel. Mr. Cabrera is an Army veteran, so that makes us brothers, and a current CBP agent, so he has firsthand knowledge of the scope of the threat before us here, as well as understanding of what our brave border personnel have to endure every day. I thank the witnesses for being here, and the witnesses' full statements will appear in the record. I now recognize Mr. McGraw to kick us off for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement. You're recognized. Could you turn, it'll turn green.
Yes, sir. I was trying to delay the time clock. I'll do anything to get a little more time, but Chairman, this is the 11th time as the Director of the Department of Public Safety I've testified before congressional hearings. And I know this is a very important issue, has been, continues to be, and I can tell you the most significant public safety, homeland security threat to the state and the nation, for that matter, is an unsecured international border with Mexico. It's been that way for some time. And as the border states, everybody's a border state. Alabama, everyone in here is a part of a border state. New York, you're a border state in that regard. Simply because we've failed to secure the international border with Mexico. What's happened over the years is we've allowed the Mexican cartels to metastasize to something much larger than they've ever been. The most powerful, ruthless, depraved, and violent criminal organizations in the world, and they're on our doorstep. They've got command and control elements. 6 of those cartels operate throughout Texas. They've dominated the lucrative drug and human smuggling market. Cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine. Whoever thought methamphetamine 10 years ago, you wouldn't imagine it. But they own it right now. The same thing with fentanyl. They've taken that over as well. I know you've talked a little bit about that already in terms of the threat as it stands. So there's no question about it. It's the unsecured border is a problem. It's not just a federal problem, it becomes a local problem with the sheriff next to me. I do have to put this in. I got to commend certainly Chief Raul Ortiz, I've worked with for over a decade, outstanding professional, and he oversees a highly professional elite organization of men and women that serve on the front line of our homeland security and national security defense of the U.S. Border Patrol. We're very proud to work with them. Texas is a very pro-law enforcement state, pro-military state, pro-law and order state, and supports their Border Patrol to the point where 2 years ago when the governor and I visited, he was upset that all of a sudden we've seen what we saw in 2014. 2014, we had 300,000. You heard Chief Ortiz talk about 300,000 unaccompanied children and family units. It swarmed and swamped and overwhelmed the U.S. Border Patrol. And since then, the governor's had us preparing for a mass migration event if it happens again, because what happens, it takes Border Patrol off the line. So what do we have in 2021? And we were planning for a failed state scenario, a catastrophic event scenario, but instead what we got is a federal policy disaster, okay, that incentivized illegal migration instead of criminalized illegal migration. So it's not a matter of just in terms of consequences, it's you're actually rewarding people, and this is the greatest country in the world. And if you're gonna reward them and tell them, you come here, and we're gonna give you a notice to disappear, that's what they're gonna do. They're gonna continue to come in droves. And the cartels have exploited it. They use social media, okay, they use information warfare. They use all the military applications in terms of whether it's logistics, but command and control, information, operations, intelligence, and certainly the demonstration or use of or application of lethal force. And we talk about it's semantics in terms of terrorism. The governor designated the cartels as terrorist organizations because, in effect, that's what they are. I mean, how many Americans have they killed versus Al-Qaeda and ISIS and Sunni extremist groups? And they do it daily. And the most recent threat that is really disturbing from Texas, because cartels have always been making money. Now they get to reap billions of money, billions of dollars of money just from the human trafficking side. They extort on both sides of the border, and not to mention, okay, the Mexican cartels are collaborating with our gangs, these regional gangs, these state-based gangs, these transnational gangs, to support the criminal activities on both sides of the border. So it only makes it worse, okay? And not just a border issue, it becomes a statewide issue. It affects every community in the state. As it relates to fentanyl, is that it's not enough to make money from a polydrug cocktail, which they were doing. Now, because it's much more profitable, how about selling to our kids, our youth, and anybody, lookalikes of Oxycontin, Adderall, okay, Percocet, and almost identical. You can't tell the difference. Our scientists can't tell the difference. And when your own DEA administrator says that 6 out of 10 of those pills have a lethal dose of fentanyl of 2 milligrams, that's a concern. And yes, we have seen deaths, and they don't really care. Yeah, you'd think that they would, but they'd rather, they can expand profits just in terms by increasing addiction in that regard. So now they've not just in terms of the overdose deaths, it's poisonings because it's a substitute. So, what's a state to do? And under Governor Greg Abbott, he launched Operation Lone Star over 2 years ago and deployed thousands of National Guard troopers, special agents that work for DPS, and certainly our Texas Rangers, our tactical teams, aircraft, tactical Marine unit. And the impact is always, felt first and foremost at the local level with the sheriff and our local police departments in that regard, and found resources and worked with the legislature to get billions of dollars of Texas taxpayer dollars have been invested in doing everything we can to help Border Patrol perform their vitally important mission, and to detect, interdict transnational criminal activity between the ports of entry. I think that's my time, so I'll be quiet now, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you. I should have asked this at the beginning. Do you prefer to be called director or colonel? But thank you for your...
Those are 2 nice terms. I've been called much worse.
Well, thanks for your opening statement. I'd now like to recognize Sheriff Coe for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Thank you all for being here today. Like I said, my name is Brad Coe. I'm the Sheriff of Kinney County, Texas. I'm currently in my 2nd term. Prior to this, I've spent 30 years with U.S. Border Patrol, all of which I spent my time in Kinney County. Kinney County has 16 miles of riverfront property with Mexico, and we are the 27th largest county in the state, but population-wise, we only have 3,200 people. I have 6 full-time deputies and 8 part-time deputies to cover the 1,300 square miles, which most of our time is spent close to town, leaving very little coverage for the rest of the county. Currently, we're under siege by illegal aliens and smugglers coming through the county, trying to get to destinations within the United States. With the current open door policy, Kinney County has seen a dramatic increase in illegal alien activity. The number of migrants seen on game cameras that I currently have deployed throughout the state, thanks to DPS, we're averaging between 160 and 180 people per night that are going through the county unchallenged. That comes out to roughly 60,000 people enter through my county this year. These are also considered godwise by Kinney County because we don't have the resources to go out and track and try to apprehend these people walking through the county. The damage to fences, water lines, and structures has ranchers spending more than they can afford to keep their properties up and running. The loss of the ability to grow crops is also a huge issue. Large groups of people walking through the property, creating trails, kills the grass that the livestock, the sheep, the goats, and the cattle depend on for survival. Our game ranches, we have exotic game ranches where you can hunt animals year-round. And some of these hunts will cost you anywhere between on the high end, $40,000 to $80,000 per animal. With the number of illegal aliens walking through the county, it's making it more and more difficult for the hunters to be successful, paying these large fees to get the animal of their choice. If we lose them, I lose the county. On the smuggling aspect, we have 6 roads that lead directly away from the border, and 2 others that circumvent the Border Patrol checkpoint in Uvalde County just east of us. These highways have seen an unprecedented increase in human smuggling activity. For calendar year 2022, which was last year, Kinney County deputies apprehended 741 human smugglers, and we filed over 3,000 felony cases against these smugglers. It's a huge increase from calendar year 2021, when we apprehended 169 human smugglers. We are currently on track right now to exceed 900 smugglers for the year. In February alone, the shortest month of the year, we did 95 smugglers. With the increase in human smuggling, increased the chances of vehicle pursuits and bailouts.
The number of pursuits increased with the human smuggling apprehensions. These increases risk the risk of traffic accidents, death, and damages to property. With the increase in pursuits that result in traffic accidents puts a huge strain on our community resources. Kinney County only has one EMS crew on duty at any given time. Our first responders for the fire department are all volunteer. We had an accident earlier in the year. Well, actually, it was in December. It was a pursuit. The vehicle tried to avoid this being spiked, lost control of the vehicle, killed 3, including the driver, plus 3 others critically injured. We had to borrow resources from another county to handle that situation. Our EMS crews were completely tied up, which took them away from their regular duties of servicing the county. Like I said, our volunteers for the fire department, they were all on scene. They had to leave their jobs to come help with that accident. Because it was a rollover, because people were ejected and killed, we had to call in air support. We had to call in Air Life from San Antonio and San Angelo in the event they were going to be needed, which brings up the question, who's paying for this? My county doesn't have the resources to pay for Air Life. As soon as the Air Life helicopter hits the ground, it's roughly $45,000. We don't have that kind of money. The people that they're transporting to from the hospitals don't have that kind of money. They don't have the insurance. We had an incident last year. We had a rollover. EMS shows up. Our only crew shows up. They're about 20 miles south of town. One of our locals in town suffers a heart attack. He didn't make it. Would he have made it had EMS been able to get to him in time? That's one of the questions we will never know. And that is all I have. Well, one other thing. I have to fight tooth and toenail to get what I have to protect my ranchers. That's all we have. We had a movie industry, Lonesome Dove, the Alamo, on and on. About 150 movies were made in Kinney County during the lifespan of Alamo Village. That has gone away. The sheep and goat industry, we reigned supreme in the world with our sheep and goat industry. That has gone away. All we have now is our hunters. That's all we have to protect the county, to support the county. We have one grocery store, one gas station, and 3,200 people. If I lose any of that, I lose the whole county. And I will go to my grave fighting for this to keep my county as safe as I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. Really appreciate your testimony. I now recognize Mr. Cabrera for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Good morning, Chairman Green. Thank you for providing me the opportunity to testify on behalf of the National Border Patrol Council. The NBPC represents 16,000 frontline agents of the Border Patrol. My name is Chris Cabrera. I joined the Border Patrol in 2001 after serving 4 years in the U.S. Army as a paratrooper. I spent my entire Border Patrol career here in the Rio Grande Valley sector of Texas. In fiscal year 2022, the Border Patrol made an unprecedented 2.2 million apprehensions. This figure is approximately 5 times the number of apprehensions made in the last year of the Trump administration. It's a clear sign of how the border policies of this administration are failing. Approximately half of the individuals we arrested last year were expelled under Title 42. As you know, this authority will cease after May of this year. And what happened to the other million that were not expelled? The vast majority were released into this country under either a notice to appear or paroled. In addition to apprehensions we made, there were well over 1.2 million confirmed illegal immigrants that evaded capture in the last 2 years. They got away simply because we didn't have enough manpower to apprehend them. To put this in perspective, the Rio Grande Valley is approximately 1.3 million people in the population. We had almost the entire population of this region escape, just walk right into this country last year. If this isn't the definition of a problem, I don't know what is. If we are going to address this chaos in the border, we need 2 things. First and foremost, we must end catch and release. Winston Churchill once famously said that Americans always do the right thing, only after they have tried everything else. When it comes to catch and release, I believe that Winston Churchill was right. First time I testified before Congress was before the Senate Homeland Security in 2015. I told the Senate then, and I will tell you today, as long as we continue to release illegal immigrants into this country, they will continue to come. It's that simple. Ending catch and release not only makes common sense, it's the law. Section 235B of the Immigration and Nationality Act requires Homeland Security to detain all migrants apprehended entering illegally. Homeland Security may, and I emphasize may, parole individuals on a case-by-case basis for humanitarian reasons or significant public benefit. That's not what the Biden administration has been doing this past 2 years. A federal judge just vacated the administration's parole policy, which is a catch and release by a different name. The second issue is Congress's responsibility. And you need to resource the Border Patrol to accomplish our mission of securing this border. Border Patrol staffing hovers around 19,300 agents. The Tucson sector chief just recently testified before a House Oversight Committee that the Border Patrol needs 22,000 agents to deal with this current crisis. Increasing our net manpower by 2,700 agents is going to take tremendous effort that will require us to do two things simultaneously. First, we need to keep the agencies we already have, and we need to recruit more agents. It sounds like a simple problem. Our Border Patrol attrition rate is 6.9%, which is 72% higher than the Office of Field Operations. The bad news is that our attrition rate is expected to climb over 9% by 2028. The primary reason we cannot retain and recruit agents is a lack of pay parity with other federal law enforcement agencies. I have spent most of my life protecting this country, whether it be for the Army or the 21 years I've spent in the Border Patrol. I've told my wife that you don't join the service to get rich. However, if I were to leave for another agency, I'd probably make about $15,000 more. For many agents with young families that come from different parts of the country, it's a no-brainer for them. So they leave as soon as they get here. It's simple for them. If we continue to hemorrhage personnel, there's no way we're going to secure this border. We spent billions on aircraft, on technology, on fencing, and that's great. We appreciate all of that stuff that you guys have given us. However, we have not sufficiently invested in our agents, which is the most important element in border security. Last Congress, Senators Portman, Sinema, and Lankford introduced S 4775, which has a provision, Section 4, to address our recruitment and retention issues. I know the committee is working on comprehensive legislation to address this crisis, and I appreciate your effort and the fact that you came all the way down here to have this hearing that we need. Now that you know what we need, I respectfully ask that you take action, and that action must include addressing our retention and recruitment issues. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I will gladly answer any questions you may have.
The gentleman, I want to thank all three of you for being here. I really appreciate it. I want to ask the members that they'll be recognized, or tell the members they'll be recognized in order of seniority, as typical for our committee for questioning. If there is time for an additional round, we may allow that to happen. And again, we'll be recognized in order of seniority. I now recognize myself for my 5 minutes questioning. Mr. Cabrera, and is that Cabrera, or how, I want to make sure I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Cabrera is fine.
Cabrera, okay. Could you briefly talk about how the Border Patrol agents have been affected by the border crisis physically and mentally?
You know, physically, it's been a rough patch for us these last few years. We lost many agents to COVID. We lost quite a few to COVID. We've had a couple officer-involved deaths with, just recently in December, we lost an agent to a vehicle accident. On top of that, suicides. Border Patrol, I think, lost 17 people in the last year. Put that in perspective, the NYPD has 35,000 officers, I believe, more or less, and they lost 4. So it is a big issue. We see a lot of stuff out there that the average person doesn't see. I think that what hits folks hardest is what happens with the children we see. We see a lot of young kids coming across 3, 4, 5 years old, 7 years old that are unaccompanied. Their parents are already here in the United States, and they send them by themselves. And who knows about the hundreds, if not thousands more that never make it through. So that I think is more on the mental aspect of it, as well as some of the physical. It's a difficult job. It's increasingly getting harder by the fact that we're not put in a position to do the job that we were trained to do. I mean, I think the Border Patrol is the only union you're ever going to see in the history of unions that is actually asking for more work. We're just let us work, let us do our job. We don't care where you put the coffee pot. We don't care about lumbar supports for our chairs. We just want to go to work. And we're just asking that you let us work.
Well, I really appreciate that. Let me ask this question of you as well, sir. What do your agents share with you? What are their thoughts about the policy changes that occurred, in 21?
The morale is down. The morale is down significantly. If you look at our numbers now versus our numbers 2 years ago, you'll see that the numbers are lopsided. Most of our agents are frustrated with the job. They're frustrated with the fact that we're babysitters. Maybe 30 to 40% of our agents actually get out to the field on any given day, and then a lot of times they get called back in to process or transport somebody. So the real bad guys, the smugglers, the ones that are harming people, the people that are bringing in drugs into this country or trafficking in humans or kids, they're getting away, and that affects the agents in their desire to do their job. And let's face it, if you have a young kid, say, that comes from Charlotte, North Carolina, and he joins the Border Patrol, and his wife comes down, say they go to Big Bend, and it's 2.5 hours to get to a Walmart, much less a hospital. The wife can't find a job because she can't speak Spanish. And then ICE comes around and says, hey, we'll give you more pay Monday through Friday, weekends and holidays off, and we'll get you back home. Of course they're going to jump ship. So we're not only losing seasoned agents, we're losing brand new agents. So there's no way we're going to catch up with that.
Let me ask Director McGraw a quick question. How much is DPS spending per month for border security, and how much was DPS spending before January 21?
Well, the state legislature and the government have invested a lot of money over the years, and certainly $800 million in the Department of Public Safety alone. But when we saw the record numbers, and I say record numbers, 1.3 million apprehensions in Texas in 2021, and again 1.4 million in 2023. The governor and legislatures have dedicated billions of dollars now. So when we do these intensified operations and we continue to send troops down and conduct these around-the-clock operations, they're threefold of what they were before. Importantly, now we have the National Guard, and the state's paying for that National Guard. And it's a very important part of it because, as Border Patrol and probably Chief Ortiz already talked about, personnel, you got to have technology, you got to have infrastructure, and you also need doctrine, right? The correct doctrine and policies in place to be able to secure the border. And one last thing, I'd like to at least put a pitch in for Border Patrol. The federal government's always undervalued the patrol function. They always have, and don't recognize the post-9/11 environment, that patrol function, how important it is in terms of prevention. And certainly they do need to be on par with their other federal counterparts. We need more boots on the border, less wingtips, and you get right down to it. And that's really what Border Patrol brings us. So.
I got your reference. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Just to summarize that, it was your budget has had to go up 3 times, if I understood you correctly, not counting the National Guard's additional cost at the border.
At least threefold, exactly. Yes, sir.
All right, thank you. My time is up. I now recognize Chairman Higgins.
Colonel McCraw.
Sir.
What's the relationship like between DPS and DHS right now? How has it been impacted by the policies of the new administration?
And we don't let the policies of an administration impact our relationships with our partners, bottom line. It's too few many law enforcement officers in Texas, 70,000, local and state. And so we work well with our federal partners. We integrate operations. It's Texas. We get along with each other. We like each other. We respond, and we got each other's back. So it hasn't changed. It hasn't changed.
That's the kind of answer I would expect from a law enforcement professional, because you're referring to your relationships with the men and women you work with on a regular basis to perform your mission to the best of your ability. The current administration, as every executive administration in the United States, has a constitutional responsibility to secure the international borders, to help our sovereign states maintain operational control with the Mexican border is absolutely a constitutional requirement. Do you feel that this administration, compared to the last administration, is fulfilling that obligation?
Well, absolutely not. Obviously, I've testified, or in my written statement, is that we've incentivized, a global mass migration event, and that deliberately impacts on Border Patrol and law enforcement in our communities across the border. So clearly, it's had a negative impact, and there's consequences. There's an unsecured international border.
Would you, I agree, Colonel, would you concur that ultimately the responsibility for that failed policy is upon the shoulders of Secretary Mayorkas and President Biden?
I'd say it's certainly the administration. Exactly who, it doesn't really matter. It's a failed policy, and it's a federal responsibility to do it, and it's not being done, period.
Well, I would say that it falls upon the shoulders of Secretary Mayorkas as the executive that allegedly has the background and the knowledge to perform according to the instructions of the President of the United States. He also has a responsibility to advise the President if the President's policies are failing in the mission and actually bringing injury upon the nation. So I would say the failure of our policies as we see them at our southern border falls squarely upon the shoulders of Secretary Mayorkas. Sheriff Coe, my 1911 brother, thank you for being here.
No, thank you.
Let's talk about what happens to these illegals when they get into the country and into your county. You come across these guys, you have to take them into custody in some way. What happens after you have concluded your law enforcement interaction with them? What's the responsiveness of ICE under this administration versus the last?
Well, if my deputies come across them, say, on somebody's property, we file charges on them for criminal trespass. DPS and the governor was very gracious, giving us a $2.5 million grant to assist with the prosecution and hire people so that we can get this done. Same thing if we catch a human smuggler. We file charges on them on everything that we can stack on them, and it's been very successful. One of the issues we do have working with ICE and some Border Patrol is Border Patrol will catch them, and the landowner is present when they're caught, and the landowner will say, I want these turned over to the county, to the sheriff's office, so I can file criminal charges against them. Border Patrol refuses. If we have, if we catch an illegal alien and for whatever reason we cannot prosecute them because we don't have bed space for a female or they're underage, whatever the case may be, we have problems having ICE to come pick them up. They say, no, it doesn't meet our status, so we need to kick them down the road.
So, Sheriff, the state charges, if you're able to prosecute under state charges for, say, criminal trespass, you conclude that adjudication at some point. They're still illegal within the country. Has the federal government put you in a position to illegally release aliens within the country?
Several times I've tried. I'll give you an example. We had an accident. There were 3 that had very minor injuries. They refused to go to the hospital. EMS cleared them. I called Border Patrol to come pick them up. They said, no, because they've been in an accident, we will not take them. ICE refused to take them. They wanted me to kick them down the road. Took it upon myself. We took them back to the international border. We took them to the port of entry and sent them home.
That's what a good sheriff would do. Thank you for your testimony, gentlemen. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Vice Chair Guest.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colonel McCraw, first of all, I want to thank you. I want to thank Governor Abbott, the men and women under your control for the billions of dollars that the state of Texas has invested in fighting this crisis. And I see that that investment has been successful in some aspects. In your written testimony, I see that during the 2-year activity of Operation Lone Star, you report that there's been more than 350 million dosage units of fentanyl that have been seized, 19 tons of methamphetamine, and that you and the men and women of the Texas National Guard, the game wardens, the DPS officials, have helped apprehend and turn over to Border Patrol over 350,000 illegal immigrants. In your statement, there are some very compelling parts. in the second paragraph, particularly, where you say that the Texas Department of Public Safety, that is your assessment that the most significant public safety and homeland security threat to Texas and the nation is our unsecured international border with Texas. You go on to say the federal government has failed to do its constitutional duty and secure the border, that this failure comes at the detriment of our citizens and the benefit of the Mexican drug cartels. Colonel, would you agree with the statement that border security is national security?
Absolutely.
You go on to describe our Mexican border as porous. And then finally, at the end of page 1 of your written statement, you say that there's compelling evidence that the federal government has incentivized rather than criminalized illegal immigration. And then you set forth specific figures as number of immigrants who have been apprehended just within the state of Texas, not within the border as a whole. 2021, you talk about 1.3 million immigrants being apprehended just within the state of Texas. 2022, we see that number grew to 1.4 million. And your testimony goes on to make sure that we know that that does not include the number of gotaways, which would significantly inflate those figures. We know that in May of this year, the administration has indicated that they will end Title 42, which this administration has said in December that we could see across the southern border a number up to 14,000 immigrants a day coming across the southern border. My question to you, Colonel, is, in your opinion, based on the information that you have, once Title 42 expires, what impact will that have on the number of immigrants that you're seeing coming into the state of Texas on a daily basis?
It'll certainly increase. How much, it's difficult to project. But there's no doubt that anything that incentivizes or encourages or something that the cartels can exploit from an information standpoint, they're going to encourage more to come. And the more that comes and the less Border Patrol is able to do their job and the more difficult it is for the state to be able to step in and help them do their job.
And what information have you received from DHS as to their plan of action as to how they plan to address this coming surge of immigrants when Title 42 expires?
Well, we work with our local Border Patrol sectors, so there's a state plan. Whether there's a federal plan or not, we can't tell you, but we certainly have a state plan that then brings together all law enforcement in Texas and the National Guard in an integrated way in terms of response as it continues to get worse. But right now, it's never been worse at 1.4 million. This is an historic high. You got to go back to 1986 to see these types of numbers in Texas, and we track it by calendar year.
Well, and I know just looking back December alone, again, across the entire southern border, over 250,000 immigrants seized in a single month. If Title 42 goes away, if the predictions that this administration has in place, those numbers will far exceed the worst month in the history of immigration. And so I guess my question is there currently a plan in place that you're aware of by DHS as to how they intend to handle the surge? Have they briefed your agency? Because clearly you're providing support capacity to our frontline CBP officers. And so here we are roughly 2 months away, 60 days away from Title 42 going away. Is there a plan in place? Have they briefed you and your department on what you can do to prepare for the coming surge? And I'll yield back after the answer to that question.
Yeah, there is a plan in place because the state of Texas doesn't need the federal government's permission to protect it. The governor has made it clear that we're going to have a plan in place. We have a plan in place. It's integrated across all 3 levels of government, and it's multi-jurisdictional and multidisciplinary, I can tell you that.
Thank you, sir. The gentleman yields, and I now recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, this hearing has already been extraordinarily significant because the U.S. Border Patrol chief testified to Congress that the administration's policy of releasing illegals in the United States as opposed to detaining them and removing them is the cause and the driver of the crisis at the border, which he characterized as being out of control and not subject to operational control of the United States government. So that's a big deal. And now I'm curious, in this stage, Colonel McCraw, you said something that sort of got me back on something that sort of is something I've focused on a lot or thought about a lot. And I don't know what your answers are going to be. They may be adverse to me politically, but I'd be fine. Because I think about, you know, we all focus on the circumstances as they are, and they're very bad, and all the bad effects that we're seeing in terms of members of the Border Patrol, Mr. Cabrera and their families, and Sheriff, what you're seeing in chases in your community, Colonel, what you're trying to do in terms of the investment your state has to make to get this under control. But here's what I wonder about is where could we go? If this continues as it is for another 2 years, we're only halfway into this through this administration. They're devoted to this policy that's so destructive. So where could we end up later on? And I'm always, my mind always goes back. The phrase that you used, Colonel, you were talking about the cartels, the transnational criminal organizations, and you mentioned command and control. I heard earlier that 35,000 flights that Congresswoman De La Cruz point out of drone flights. They're coming across. I made some people sort of smile, not unknowingly, when I asked them hearing a year or so ago, why we don't shoot them down? And they also like, you can't do that. So we're having, you know, they're bringing drugs and people over with the use of far better equipment than Border Patrol has available. I always get the name of the town wrong. I think it's Culiacan. In January, had not the first, but the latest war between the Mexican military and the Sinaloa cartel over the arrest of Ovidio Guzman, son of El Chapo. And I would love to show you these pictures. I don't have them, but the Los Angeles Times has some great pictures that show flaming tractor trailers and smashed cars and one or two of the narco tanks with these improvised rigs on them that cartel fighters taking on the Army, firing 50 caliber weapons at aircraft in the air. And the thing, and I understand it's a whole different deal in the United States, but if you have, I'm told, Mr. Cabrera, that Border Patrol always tells me that nothing comes across the border unless the cartel permits it. And I understand, is that basically true, sir?
Yes, sir, that's true.
And I hear that $15 billion of income comes to the cartel just from the fees for people to come across. And a lot of them owe those fees. We're hearing about those stories. And I heard HSI, or I forget what it is, which agency, but is seeing a surge in violence relating to collecting those fees. So you have hundreds of thousands or millions of people coming in. Obviously, most of them perfectly fine people, and they want to abide by the law, but they're all under the thumb of a cartel that's growing across the border. And you talked about the command and control, the capabilities they have, Colonel. What's to prevent them from developing in the United States the circumstance that you saw in Culiacan, where they could go to war against American law enforcement and military forces?
Well, first of all, the Mexican cartels are already inside the United States. They have command and control elements in here involved to support their operations of drug and human trafficking. They work with the gangs that we talked about before. Where you see most of the violence, manifest itself as relates to the cartels is with gangs and through gangs. If you talk to local law enforcement, anybody will tell you, even in the fentanyl market, it doesn't matter what market it is, it's the gangs and their collaboration with each other and with the cartels are the biggest problem right now. The Mexican cartels own Mexico. It's the bottom line, through intimidation, hyper-violence, coercion, and frankly, corruption.
If our policy continues to profit them and build the people they can abuse and manipulate for their own purposes, couldn't they strengthen in the United States to the point that they're that kind of a hazard?
Well, a seemingly compassionate policy of allowing everybody in the world to come to the United States is anything but. Because you turn them over, as you noted, to the Mexican cartels. And there's too many rapes, there's too many violent crimes that are committed upon those women and children that are moved into this country. And the extortion continues, not just in terms of when they get to the river, they got the money, they'll continue it on in stash houses. In some cases, Chinese in particular, we've come across in terms of where they're indentured servitude. They don't have $50,000, $70,000 to pay to get here. They owe a criminal organization that money okay, to be able to work off their debt. And whether it's the sex trafficking industry, we've seen when young girls and women have been attracted from and recruited from Central America and from Central Mexico on the promise of a domestic servant. I mean, these are brutal, depraved, you know, cowardly criminals that can care less. And certainly they impact. In our profession, it's the absence of crime and disorder that defines success. And right now, there's anything but the absence of crime and disorders in relation to the border, and it impacts every community in the nation.
At risk the chairman will gavel me down, I'd like Mr. Cabrera to answer that question too. Do you see any risk of the kind of specter that I described in the United States?
As far as that happening, I mean, we have had issues here in the Rio Grande Valley. I know that there's cartel members living among us in our area, not just in our area, and probably everyone's area that are just flying under the radar. There's always a possibility, whether it's on a small scale. I can't see the larger scale taking off just for the fact that our law enforcement is not corrupt like it is on the Mexican side, but there will be violence on it. Yeah.
Thank God for y'all. Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. Thank you.
The gentleman is humored and now yields. The next, I'd like to recognize our next member from Florida, Mr. Jimenez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I heard a story Monday when I was in Miami about an individual that tried to cross and was captured by the cartel, and thinking that everybody in Miami has money, they called his cousin and FaceTime. The cousin didn't have the money, and they basically murdered his cousin on FaceTime because he couldn't give up the $10,000. That's the kind of people that we're dealing with, having absolutely no value for human life. It's all about profit. Mr. McCraw, have you told has the Biden administration gotten the word of what it is they need to do in order to fix the problem at the border?
They have a lot of smart people back there. It'd be impossible not to know what's the right thing to do. This is not rocket science.
I agree. And so, do you think the President of the United States is dumb?
I'm not going to comment on that.
Do you think that
I don't even see it.
Do you think that the Secretary of Homeland Security is dumb?
Certainly, he's not.
Okay.
There's no question.
So the only thing you can come up with is this is done on purpose.
There's no. I can't see it otherwise. It's done on purpose. I don't know that it's meant to be malevolent and to rot the problems it has, but it certainly has.
Well, you'd have to be pretty dumb not to see that what you're doing is malevolent, and it actually has real dire consequences in the United States. So it's actually done on purpose.
Yeah.
I've come to that conclusion a long time ago.
Yeah.
They're actually doing this on purpose.
Yeah,
right?
Whatever the reasons.
Why, I don't know.
Yeah, whatever the reasons, because this is not a political issue, it's a public safety issue, and it hurts.
I got it. So now, okay, now that we know that it's on purpose, okay, now let's move on to something else, okay? All right. How many different cartels are there on the southern border?
Well, in Texas, which we focus on, there's 6 Mexican cartels that operate.
Do you have any intelligence on how many members of the, how many members of the cartels have on the border, on the southern, on the Mexican side?
No.
You don't?
No. We've got some estimations in terms of working with DEA along those lines, but exact numbers.
No, not exactly. What's your estimation?
I wouldn't even want to, because the extensions of the cartels, I wouldn't want even to project in terms of how many members, but clearly there's as many members of the cartel than there are in gangs in Texas, and we've identified over 100,000 gang members. So it's
at least 100,000. You think at least 100,000 of them?
There's going to be, because at some point, and whether they're directly or indirectly cartel members, there's no question they've got an army of people down there. In fact, I mean, we know from past experience, the Zetas, the whole Zeta part, were former Mexican military that went over to be the enforcement arm of the cartel. The Gulf cartel moved over, created its own cartel. So you have this continuing, rebranding and splitting of cartels, and they continue to, as we've talked about before, metastasized.
Does the Mexican military have the capacity to deal with these cartels?
They haven't demonstrated the capacity to deal with the cartels.
But do you think they have the capacity?
I don't know.
Okay.
Because the capacity includes will.
Well, that's my next question. You beat me to the punch,
yeah.
Because then do you think they have the will?
Well, I know the government of Mexico does not have the will.
Thank you. I do too. I think the government of Mexico does not have the will. They may have the will if the drugs that are poisoning us were actually poisoning the Mexican people. So I really have starting to have some doubts about where this government of Mexico lies. And is there a deal, a secret alliance, something that says, hey, keep the drugs out of Mexico, okay, and I'll leave you alone. You can go ahead and poison the Americans all you want.
And there's no news to the fact that Mexico has had issues with corruption as it relates to the Mexican cartels.
And yet the policies of the Biden administration actually helps the cartels because they're making huge profits off of immigration, right? So these policies actually are helping the cartels grow in power and their ability to kill Americans, and yet the Biden administration knows they're wrong and continues to do it.
Yeah, there's clearly there was at the end of the day, the impact on the cartels is they're richer and more powerful than they were before this mass migration began.
All right, and that is all due to the failed policies of the Biden administration, which we have to assume they know are wrong.
I'm not going to say what they assume. I just know that it's not rocket science to figure this out.
Yeah, it's or brain surgery, actually. I mean, you know, we have a physician.
I think brain surgery is a little complicated, but yes,
okay.
Yes, sir.
I got it. Okay, thank you. Yeah,
Yes,
I yield back.
Thank you. And I recognize our next witness, or our next questioner, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Fluger.
Thank you, Chairman. I thank all of you for being here, for your service to protect this country and keep it safe. We have had what I would characterize as a groundbreaking testimony today by Chief Ortiz, Chief of the Border Patrol, and he said that he does not believe we have operational control over the southern border. Number two, he does not believe that in at least 5 of the 9 sectors along the southwest border that it is secure, and that we have a policy crisis. And Mr. Cabrera, you know, I'd like you to speak on behalf. How many people do you represent in the National Border Patrol Council?
16,500.
Please speak on behalf of 16,500. Do they believe that we have operational control of our southern border, that it is secure?
Absolutely not.
You know, we've heard a lot today. I appreciate your testimony about the morale. Do you feel, again, speaking on behalf of those 16,500, do they feel supported by the Commander-in-Chief, by Secretary Mayorkas? Do they feel like they have the resources they need to do their job?
Absolutely not.
How sad is that, that you have testified that we have not sufficiently invested in our agents? We hear you. We support you. How sad is it? Do you want a bipartisan solution or just one party supporting you?
Oh, we need a bipartisan solution. This immigration, especially what happens to these women and children along this border, has nothing to do with politics. I mean, no. if we lined all these kids up in the room, I'm sure you guys would come up with a solution in a matter of hours.
And how sad is it that our colleagues on the other side of the aisle are not here in McAllen today in the Rio Grande Valley to see those unaccompanied minors, to hear the stories, to talk to you, and to hear you saying that you have a recruiting and a retainment problem, that we had 17 plus suicides last year. It's very sad. Colonel McCraw, thank you for your service. You know, just about an hour ago, I talked to a family member, the daughter of one of the 3 women who is missing in Mexico from Benitez, right here in the Rio Grande Valley. Very sad situation. And with that event, with the recent murders of Americans in Mexico, do you see the cartels acting more brazenly? And in fact, let's go a step further. Do you see them employing terroristic tactics?
They've been employing terrorist tactics for years. This is nothing new. Kidnappings of Americans is nothing new. Kidnappings, extortions, torture, these things go back decades to the Mexican cartels. So I don't mean to be gratuitous, it's just not covered in Mexico. And the reason it's not, I mean, being a journalist is not a good position to be in Mexico, writing about cartel violence, plain and simple. They'll target it. I don't care if it's a blogger or a professional journalist or a judge or a police officer. No one's exempt from the cartels and their level of brutality.
All 3 of you are law enforcement professionals, military experience. If you see an enemy use a tactic, technique, or procedure that threatens the lives of those that you're in command of or civilian populations, do you disseminate that information?
Certainly.
So if they're it's been alleged that there was an IED that was used by the cartels across the border. Would that be something that our Border Patrol agents would want to know?
Absolutely. I mean, I know as a Border Patrol agent, I'd like to know something like that was happening, regardless of where it is on the border. I mean, I think it needs to go out to across all agents, all stations that be on the lookout for something like this, because it could mean your life.
Absolutely. I assume the same for the Sheriff's Department and for DPS throughout the state of Texas.
Certainly.
Yeah. Colonel, can you talk to the expense that the state of Texas has had to endure because of the abdication of responsibility of the federal government? I'm talking all the expense, from the hospitals to the jails, you know, the Operation Lone Star and Stone Garden.
Just in the last couple of years, it's billions of dollars, but there's even more cost because every time we get a surge like this, and where we take troopers, we take special agents, Texas Rangers, and we take resources from other parts of the state, as sheriffs know, from those locations, and we send them down to the borders to be able to do intensified operations. And that takes away a public safety value in those areas. So it becomes more safe here, supporting our Border Patrol partners, less safe there. So there's an impact in terms of statewide, and we recognize that. And certainly the governor recognizing that, and the state legislature has recognized that. But the governor's made it very clear to me is that at the end of the day, is that a secured international border with Mexico is an absolute imperative. And without that, we don't have public safety in our homeland security in Texas.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for your testimony and your service. With that, Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize the gentlelady from Georgia, Mrs. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here today and engaging in this important discussion with us. It's a necessary discussion, and again, we are outraged and angered that our Democrat colleagues didn't see the importance of our national security and our border security, even to be important enough for them to get on an airplane and come down here and be here for this hearing. Shame on them. Shame on them for not coming and listening to you and engaging in this important discussion about how to protect our country and protect our border. During Trump's administration, the entire administration, there were approximately 2,437,856 alien encounters in that 4 years. During the Biden administration, to date, which is just over 2 years, there have been 4.7 million alien encounters just in his time as president. That is double. It has doubled in just that short amount of time. Now, under the Trump administration, there were 581,257 gotaways during 4 years. During the Biden administration, to date, it is 1.3 million gotaways. This is an incredible increase, and it is not by mistake or accident. In your opinion, each of you, what are the policy changes that have happened to contribute to this invasion of our country? Mr. Cabrera.
I think first you have the parole. We're paroling people into the United States instead of mandatory detention, mandatory removal. The talk of ending remain in Mexico and then putting it right back on a couple days later, that had some issues. Before we could send everybody back, and after Biden restarted it, we could only send certain folks back. I think those are the two biggest ones. If we continue to let people come in, they're going to continue to come in. It's just like with a kid. If you let them do certain things and you tell them no, but there's no consequence to it, they're going to continue to test those limits, and that's what we're seeing. We can tell them all day long that if you come, we'll send you back. But once we release them into the country, they call home, they put it on Facebook or Instagram or whatever they use, and more people come because regardless of what I say or the commissioner or whoever, their brother, their sister, their cousin told them how to do and how to do it and how it's done, and so they do it.
Open door policies. Sheriff Coe.
Well, I agree 100%. Because of the lack of consequences, they just continue on. That's why we started prosecuting for criminal trespass, and we've seen it effective because we're pushing the foot traffic into another county. We're still catching them, but not as many, but we're pushing them to another county. I hate to do that, but that's the only way I can protect my county. So there has to be consequences.
That's right. Colonel McCraw.
Agreed with Agent Cabrera.
Thank you. It is my opinion, and I have co-sponsored legislation to impeach Secretary Mayorkas for his failure as Secretary of Homeland Security to do his job to protect our country, and in not doing his job to enforce policies or bring policies under the Biden administration that allow our good men and women of the Border Patrol and ICE to do their jobs. And I think that's something that should be done, definitely. But I'd like to talk to you for a second, Mr. Cabrera, because you said something that struck me, and I want to acknowledge this. You stated in your opening testimony that you told your wife that you didn't take this job for the money, because your job, you don't get paid a lot of money. Border Patrol agents don't get paid a lot of money. As a matter of fact, men and women in all law enforcement don't get paid a lot of money, but you do such an important job, and I thank you for that, and you're the right man for the job. So I just wanted to say that to you. But also, I looked it up while the discussion was going on. Secretary Mayorkas makes $200,000 a year in his job while he's failing to do his job. And I'm a business owner, and that's what I did all my life before I became a member of Congress. And I believe in accountability as well, and that's what you gentlemen just spoke of, is accountability. And I believe in accountability to people that are getting paid to do a job. And Secretary Mayorkas certainly should not get paid the big salary that he gets to put men and women in the Border Patrol, their lives in danger like they are every single day. In the hearing before this one, or actually this morning, it was revealed to us that an explosive device was found by Border Patrol on January 17th. But it didn't seem to be reported to very high levels. And I was just wondering, had you heard about an explosive device being found in January?
Absolutely not. Actually, the first I learned of it was this morning, watching the live stream in the room down the hall.
Right, and so that, to me, that's the cartels taking it to a whole different level that puts our Border Patrol men and women in extreme danger. And you mentioned, how many suicides did you say there were among Border Patrol agents?
17.
Out of 18,000?
16,000.
Okay.
Well, 19,500, including
19.
Supervisors and management.
Out of 19,500, there were 17 suicides. And you said there were how many suicide under New York?
30 out of 35,000 officers, 4.
Four. That shows the tremendous difference in stress and emotional toll on Border Patrol agents with a much higher suicide rate, and that again is devastating. Is there, what do you see could be done for Border Patrol agents to make their jobs easier, less frustrating, and for them to be able to accomplish what they need to do on a daily basis?
So if you could answer as quickly as possible, I appreciate that.
We just need to get out there, let us do our jobs the way we were trained to do it, enforce the laws as they were written, and let the law supersede the policy as opposed to the policy superseding the law.
Thank you.
Well said by a paratrooper. All right. The gentlelady yields, and I recognize Mr. LaLotta from New York.
Thank you, Chairman. Gentlemen, thanks for being here, for what you're doing for our great country. I represent a suburban district in New York. I'm about an hour or two east of Manhattan. I'm the Yankee in the crowd, and appreciate your hospitality. I think I've traveled the furthest of any member in the committee here. This issue is important to my constituents. It's important to me because New York is indeed a border state. We are a border state because of the sanctuary city policies that come from my state. We are a border state because of President Biden and Secretary Mayorkas' failed leadership, and we are a border state because of the lack of infrastructure, technology, and personnel at the border. And my first line of questioning is going to go to the folks from the state and local, the director and the sheriff. You folks are stepping up and are leading where the federal government is not. This should be a federal issue. The federal government has a responsibility to secure our border. And in absence of that, I commend you and I thank you on behalf of my constituents for stepping up. We've had tons of fentanyl deaths in our county, about 400 recently. We have crime, we have overcrowding in our schools, we have legitimate people looking to go through the immigration process, and folks have cut that line, but your leadership, gentlemen, has helped thwart some of that. So my question is, as a follow-on to Mr. Fluger's question, what is the cost of you stepping up in the federal government's absence in terms of dollars? What have you had to spend, first you, Director, and then Sheriff afterwards, what have you had to spend to fill those leadership shoes?
Well, just in the last 2 years, the state's spent over $4 billion. And they're looking at spending another $4 billion in the next biennium, and they're having to find revenue to be able to do that. So they're not planning on it being the problem immediately going away and dissipating. And frankly, if we would love to see, and by the way, 23,000, and we're talking about Border Patrol agents, you're down to 19,000. And then you talk about New York City, one police department's got more officers than the entire U.S. Border Patrol. And they've got 2 I mean, it's pitiful in terms of the underinvestment the federal government's made in Border Patrol over the years in border defenses. That's my one comment. I'll keep my other comments to myself.
And many of my constituents don't know this. My understanding is of Texas' 200-something counties. Many of the counties deploy their officers, their deputies, to the border to help secure the border, sir?
254, and they certainly would, but they're usually back at home trying to take care of the gaps that we leave when we left, when we send troopers down south. But there's not a one that doesn't have to deal with border-related problems in their jurisdiction already.
Thank you. Sheriff, on the cost in terms of dollars to your agency, sir?
On my cost, my current budget's just a little over $1 million. That's to cover everything. We're 6 months into it, and I've already expended all my fuel money. So we've got to borrow from somebody else or take it from another department because of issues like that. The cost of EMS having to transport people to and from a local hospital, which we don't have. We got to go 40 miles to go to a hospital. About 20% of what we're transporting to hospitals is the result of illegal immigration. Aliens that have succumbed to the heat or have some type of broken leg, broken arm, been snake bit out in the brush, we have to transport them. We don't get reimbursed. So our EMS crew and my office are going to be in the red again this year because of this.
Safe to say, Sheriff and Director, you would agree that the federal government should reimburse you for those costs?
They should have been reimbursing us a long time ago because the federal government won't pay for our transport to and from.
I'm not sure that Stafford Act covers policy disasters, but clearly it is a disaster and certainly a crisis.
I agree with that. Moving on to opportunity cost, you're diverting resources, personnel, equipment, and otherwise to cover the federal government's back where the federal government has failed. How would you address where you're having to miss the ball back at home in terms of crimes against people, crimes against property? What are you missing because you have to divert your resources to a federal government problem?
On the county level, part of my job is, yes, to help get cats out of the trees, hang out with the kids at school, teach the kids to respect law enforcement, be an example. But because of this illegal immigration, my resources are going elsewhere. Yes, we still handle some of the domestic stuff, the big stuff, but being in the public eye, like we're supposed to be, we're out doing Border Patrol's job. No offense to the Border Patrol, because they're being tied up doing other things. My crew I've got 6 full-time deputies, and we spend the majority of our day processing smugglers and illegal immigrants because the Border Patrol can't. So we're missing out on a lot when things we should be doing that we can't.
We have to conduct surge operations, sustain deployments around the state from resources elsewhere in the state, and continue to move wave after wave after wave to be able to keep intensified patrol operations, on the river, certainly in the air and on the ground and the brush streams.
Let me close by once again saying thank you. It's a sacrifice that you and your officers and deputies are making personally, financially, and us New Yorkers, we do appreciate it. I yield, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Luttrell from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see everybody again, Colonel and Sheriff Coe. It's been a while. It's good to lay eyes on you again. Yesterday, we had the opportunity with DPS to travel around on the river, and we saw where the cartels, and on the other side, it was beautiful, beautiful homes, just extravagant. But the cartel have come in and taken all that over and run away all the industry and businesses and families that were there. So now it's nothing like it used to be. My question is, Sheriff, with the push across the border into your county and surrounding counties, what is the How many people are leaving? What, and because you said industry, the sheep and the goat industry depleted, it's gone.
Yes, sir.
Are you seeing that surge more and more, and is it lateral across the borders?
Well,
on our side?
If we go by the last census, the current census shows we have a population of 3,100 people, almost 3,200. The census before, we had 3,900 people. So by that, we've lost 700 people in the past 10 years. But what we're starting to see because of this is, yes, people are leaving, but they're selling their properties. We've got one really nice piece of property that I'd like to have, but he's tired of fixing his fences. He offers hunts to wounded warriors, and he's constantly in the public eye in our county anyway, helping with the 4-H, FFA, Little League, et cetera, et cetera. He's getting ready to pull out, and we won't see him again. So we will lose that part of the industry, that tax base, plus his goodwill towards our county keeping us afloat. And the only people that are buying big tracts of land right now are the people that are subdividing it. They start subdividing it, they want to divide it. He's got 3,500 acres. Somebody wants to come in and buy that subdivide it into 10,000 or 10-acre plots, which will completely destroy my county because people are tired. They're getting ready to leave.
Just to clarify something that you and I spoke about, if a rancher's fence is torn down and their livestock exit the ranch and get on the freeway, the highway systems, and a vehicle strikes that animal, it's the rancher's responsibility to pay, correct?
Correct. The rancher is responsible for that animal getting on the highway.
And that happens quite often?
It has happened quite often.
Okay. Mr. Cabrera, and this is the hard one. This is the nut we can't seem to crack. And when it comes to morale and health, I mean, in Big Bend, 2.5 hours to the Walmart, that's not going to change.
Yeah.
That's just not.
Yeah.
We have to figure out another way. How can we help enhance the want and desire to become an agent, but serve in these challenging areas?
You know, I think a big part of it is going to be pay parity. You know, if somebody can leave to a different organization and get closer to home, I mean, it's just common sense. You know, they're going to go home, and what the old saying is, happy wife, happy life. You know, and some guys will take the commute. Some guys drive 2 hours from El Paso, but it starts to become a drain on them little by little. So I know the patrol has done some things as far as making it a hardship station where you could stay for X amount of years, and then you could transfer to a station of your choice. So stuff like that helps out.
This may be a little technical, but with just the advancements of technology in the areas that we are short on officers, would it make more sense if we surge technology into places that maybe necessarily people don't want to operate and have that assist a smaller number in order to enhance numbers somewhere else?
Most definitely. I mean, you look at the aerostats, those big blimps you see. I mean, those things are wonderful. They work wonders for us out here, and I know most of the patrol has lost access to those. We still have them in the McAllen areas, and once we lose them, and we will, it's gonna be a big blow to our agents because they're very useful. They can operate around the clock. They're not worried about fuel like the helicopters. If you could get those in other places, that would greatly help.
I think we might work on that. I yield back, sir.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Strong from Alabama.
Thank you. Sheriff Coe, you mentioned that the population of Kinney, Texas is declining. I already got that question answered. What is the capacity of your jail in Kinney?
Right now, my jail is closed down because it's old and it doesn't meet jail standards.
Okay. How many schools do you have in Kinney, Texas?
One.
You have one school. Do you have illegal aliens being taught in your school?
At this time, no.
Thank you. And I also want to thank you for going the extra mile and rather than just kick the can down the road, taking those illegals back to the border and send them back where they came from. That right there is very commendable. Colonel McGraw, do you believe it's time that the U.S. military stops this invasion of the southern border?
Yeah, I certainly believe it's time for the federal government to do its sovereign responsibility and whatever resources it needs to do it.
Thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Burkeen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sheriff, you had mentioned something. This was not be something that's part of the record of this hearing, but I had a chance to introduce myself to you. I liked your 5-inch brim and your good leather work on your belt.
Thank you, sir.
We had a conversation before this hearing started where you had mentioned to me in 2005, circa,
Yes, sir.
that there was a policy that you paid attention to, detention, consequences. I'd like for you to elaborate on what you shared with me in private to this committee.
Okay. Back in 2005, I was with U.S. Border Patrol. We started a program that was called Operation Streamline. We started in one little part of Del Rio sector and expanded it as it went on. But every illegal alien caught, everybody, male or female, was prosecuted for 8 U.S.C. 1325, which is illegal entry into the United States. It worked. We had areas in Eagle Pass, Texas, that were seeing groups on apprehension on a daily basis, anywhere between 50 and 150. Once we started that prosecution, they went someplace else. Once they moved, we moved with them. And after about a year and a half, our apprehensions went through the floor. Where we were apprehending 150, 200 a day in Brackettville, it went down to 10 or 12 a day. And those are usually, they're being transported in smuggling cases, but they too were prosecuted for illegal entry. And then we expanded that into expedited removal. In other words, right there on the spot, we did the paperwork, they were removed back to Mexico, and it was considered a deportation. So if they ever entered again, they were facing felony charges. That program worked.
And can you elaborate on, there was jail time involved in this, correct?
Yes.
As a deterrent?
Up to 180 days in jail for the illegal entry, which is a misdemeanor. And if they were caught again for reentry after deport, I believe it's 2 years or 5 years? 5 years. They faced up to 5 years for reentry after deport.
That's great. What do you experience now? Can you elaborate on if you show up on the scene and your county is not the first to apprehend them? If the Border Patrol is there, what happens in terms of your ability to start trespass proceedings against this person?
If we show up on scene and the landowner wants the ones that are caught on his property processed and prosecuted for criminal trespass, but Border Patrol got their hands on them first, they will not give them back to us. It's not because the agents in the field don't want to. It's not because the patrol agent in charge doesn't want to. It's coming from Washington.
And there's so many years of experience here in front of us at this table of dealing with this. President Biden has made the comment, not one more foot in regards to building a fence or a wall. Director, what can you tell me? We saw, I think it was either under DPS or National Guard in the El Paso sector, rent a fence that the Texas Department, was actually where the federal government had stopped the construction. I took a picture with it. It says rent a fence. Can you talk to me about Texas's position on physical barriers?
They're an absolute necessity. And as Congressman Luttrell indicated, sometimes you don't need it. Big Bend's a pretty good infrastructure itself if you've got technology employed, but clearly El Paso, when you have Venezuelans swelling along the Del Norte Bridge in trying to push in, if you don't have the infrastructure, and certainly on some of the areas where Texas Military Department has put concertina wire and other infrastructure, then you're going to get people able to move in such quantities that you can't stop it. So infrastructure plays a key role, and I think that whether it's permanent infrastructure or even temporary infrastructure where we've had to use simply because we don't have time to build the type of fence that needs to be there, it's important.
And Mr. Guerrero, you represent 16,000 Border Patrol agents out of almost 20,000. And what is the guys and gals that you work with, what's their position on physical barriers? We have people across the nation post-86 amnesty who would talk about that there's no value in physical barriers. What are the people that you work with and your years of experience, what does it tell you on the value of physical barriers to solve this problem?
They work. I mean, it works 100%. You may come over that wall. If you climb over that wall, the chances are that our agents are going to be there to meet you on the other side. In Hidalgo, if there was no wall there, from the time you left the river to the time you disappear into the community is less than 30 seconds. But with that wall up, that gives us a good 3, 4, 5 minutes for you to get over and get down, and our agents are there. So without that wall, it doesn't stop everything, but it gives us enough time to get in position. And I mean, there's one around the White House. There's a reason that it's there, because it works.
So in terms of allocation of resources, you believe that one agent has the ability with the fence, a fencing structure, has the ability then to be able to cover much more ground, whether they're horseback, ATV, that gives that agent greater distance and more efficiency in their day-to-day work activities?
It is a force multiplier. It does slow them down so that our agents can get there and get the job done. So it's not the only tool in the toolbox, but it is a very necessary tool.
Thank you. I yield.
The gentleman yields. It would appear that I skipped one of our members. My apologies. My deepest apologies to the gentlelady from Florida. You are now recognized, Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today's testimony makes clear that Mexican drug cartels are trafficking narcotics, weapons, and children across our southern border, and that border security is collapsing under the failed policies of the Biden administration. We must recognize that the Biden administration's reckless failure to secure our border is allowing criminals to enter our country and undermining the rule of law. Between October 2022 and January 2023, Customs and Border Patrol officials arrested 9,445 individuals with criminal convictions, 209 members of known criminal organizations, and 53 people whose names appear on the FBI's terror watch list. What's even more concerning are the estimated gotaways who we cannot track. One argument that has been made by the administration in support of their failed policies is that our approach at the southern border should be humanitarian focused. So I would like to return to a subject of some prior statements, Colonel McCraw, that you made, and discuss the humanitarian effects on people that are coming across this border, those who are exploited, injured, or even killed. And I would like for you to share with us, if you would, your impression of whether these policies of the administration are, in fact, having a humanitarian effect.
Well, it may seem compassionate, but anytime you attract millions of people from around the world to essentially turn themselves over to the Mexican cartels, and we've described in detail in terms of how violent and ruthless they are, you're basically setting them up to be victims of crime. And it happens again and again and again. And not just when they get, before the river, but on the river, but in the other side of the river. And Sheriff Coe talked about in terms of abandonments. And you'll see even kids, because kids are great that you can bring with them, the younger the better. So bring a kid in your family unit if you're captured in that regard. But at the same point, they abandon those kids. And I don't know how many lives we've lost. I don't know Kinney County, but certainly Brooks County, right by the Falfurrias checkpoint. All of these things are playing out. Investigations that we conduct, investigations are very important when we target the cartels. Very important to do. But sex trafficking investigations, we've talked about these major cases. What these cartels and these organizations do is to people is undescribable. You don't hear about it. It's not reported much, but it's happening, and you see it in our investigations, and you see it in patrol operations.
Tell us, if you would, what are the primary types of those investigations that you see, the common things that are happening, criminal conduct that's occurring, that's victimizing these individuals who are attempting to cross the southern border illegally?
Well, first and foremost, it's very difficult to tell the difference between smuggling and trafficking anymore with the cartels. So first and foremost, the money on the front side, you can argue, well, that's just the smuggling fee. But when they get across, they're maintained and housed inside stash houses, and they insist upon calling relatives to get more money. So it's kidnapping, in effect. Then you get them when they finally go to their final destination. They know where they're at. They know how to get in contact with them in that regard. And now it's extortion. They continue to pay money back to the cartels that they owe because they couldn't afford to pay all of it. And, going back to the policy side of it, is that people, will give up, and they've demonstrated again, they will sell everything they have to be able to try to come to the United States because it's that important. If they believe they have an opportunity, they won't if they believe that there are consequences.
Agent Cabrera, I'd like to ask a similar question of you. One thing that you mentioned earlier was your belief that if the children who you had seen victimized as part of this flood of individuals illegally across our southern border were here, that we would reach a policy solution. Tell me, if you would, what it is you have observed with women and children and how they are being treated coming across our southern border.
Just the other day, probably about a week or so ago, maybe 2 weeks, it was about 35 degrees, 40 degrees, somewhere in there. And we had a little boy that was brought up by another group that found him crying on the river. He was 4 years old. He had one shoe on. He was soaking wet. And his parents were already here in the United States. We see that all the time. We see little girls 5, 6, 7 years old that their parents are already here, and they sent them in care of a smuggler, and the parents are in Houston or in Detroit or wherever. A while back, I had a 13-year-old girl that came up to us, turned herself in at the wall in a group of about 70. We asked for her documentation, and she handed us her birth certificate. She didn't say a word. All she did was cry for the hour and a half it took for the buses to get out there to come pick her up. We couldn't console her, and I mean, God only knows what happened to that young lady. I saw a lady, I think in her late 50s, and she was just pummeled to a bloody pulp. This was about a year ago, and the reason she was pummeled is these river guides tried to get to her 12-year-old granddaughter. And luckily she fought them off, but she paid the price for it. But we see that time and time and time again. And if you did mandatory detention, mandatory removal, we wouldn't see this because we wouldn't be incentivizing people coming over and let's do everything we can. Let's risk our lives. Let's risk our young children. Let's put our young girls on birth control at the age of 12 or give them Plan B because we know that's part of the journey. If we disincentivize this journey, people would stop taking that journey.
Thank you, Agent Cabrera. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentlelady yields, and I now recognize from her own district the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Dela Cruz.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here today. When I spoke last session, I talked about the importance of technology and specifically drones, and where we had over 35,000 detections and 10,000 incursions. Well, drones can't work themselves, right? We need the manpower, the agents to be able to work them. So retention and recruitment is an important part of securing the future of our nation. So this question actually goes to Mr. Cabrera. Mr. Cabrera, over the last year, due to the failed Biden policy and the stress that it has put on our Border Patrol agents, have you seen an increase in agent retirement?
Yeah, most definitely. And, you know, like we said before, technology is great. We can have all the technology in the world, but if we don't have the agents, bless you, we don't have all the agents on the ground to stop it, we're not going to be able to do anything. It used to be when I first came in, and even up until about 5 years ago, when you hit that retirement age, you had maybe a 7 to 10 year gap where you could go, but most guys didn't go. They stayed till mandatory. Now when guys hit that retirement age, they jump as soon as they can, and that's a shame because we're losing very senior, seasoned agents that we're just letting them go.
Do you see that trend continuing?
I see that trend continuing, and I foresee it getting worse.
Share with the committee here about recruitment, and recruitment being a key part of being able to make sure that whoever's retiring, that not only do we still fill those spots, but even increase our agents at the border. So share with the committee about polygraphs and how polygraphs have affected recruitment.
You know, I think polygraphs have their place. I think the Border Patrol polygraph, I think it's a flawed system. I know we've had guys that come out of the military with security clearance, top secret, and they fail the Border Patrol polygraph, and so they get sent on down the road. I have tons of stories, whether it's people I know or people that I'm related to that can't pass the Border Patrol polygraph, but they pass the one for customs, or they go into DPS, or they fail it the first time and pass it the second time. It's just astonishing that nobody can pass this polygraph, and it's, I mean, they ask some just ridiculous questions. They even go into it. Sometimes I've even heard of them going into people's sexual orientation on these polygraphs. What that has to do with anything is insane. But you know, if there is a place for it, they need to revamp that system and make it so that we're not losing good candidates to DPS. Which we are, and you know, it's good for them, it's bad for us.
So is this something, the polygraph test and how it's being utilized with the Border Patrol recruitment, something you would like this committee to take a look at?
Most definitely. I mean, like we said before, we're losing tons of great agents for just silly technology.
Tell us about overtime caps and how that affects maximizing the boots on the ground.
We have overtime caps. I don't know the exact numbers on it, but we do have a cap on overtime. So if we work it early on in the year, like this time of the year, everybody starts taking their overtime, and then towards September, October, November, there's no overtime left, because even if it's available, the agents can't go over that cap to work it because they've made too much already.
So let me make an example for my colleagues here that I think is very important. So people are maximizing their overtime right now. So let's just say November, if we had a migrant flow of 10,000 Haitians come over like they did in the past years, people would be maxed out on their overtime and could not go out and assist. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you very much, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields, and I just want to add that in the border bill that we have put together, the polygraph issue is addressed. So hopefully the administration will sign that bill and the Senate will pass it. But for prior law enforcement and military, et cetera, those with the security clearance, the polygraph will be waived. A couple of admin notes. First, for the committee members, we have some food for you in the round table room, and we will do the press conference in about 20 to 30 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask you, I know that every member was notified about...
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, thank you. I know that every member was notified about this committee hearing. Could you tell me what date we were notified so that we could make our schedules available for this most important hearing in Texas?
Well, actually, the press, give me just a second. I got to find the exact date for you.
February 24th, Mr. Chairman.
It was at least a week ago. I want to give you the actual date. February 21st was actually the first notice.
Thank you.
Yep. I thank the panel of the witnesses for being here. Incredibly valuable testimony. The members of the committee may have some additional questions for you, and they'll submit those in writing. You can submit your answers in writing. Pursuant to the committee rule 7D, the hearing record will be held open for 10 days for such testimony. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.